YouTube has demonetized all my channels, and I need your help to get them reinstated. To help out, all you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Night Watchers, or just click the link in the description, subscribe, and check out our videos. It's an uncensored comedy horror podcast where you can hang out with me, Niall from Oni Plays, and our friends. We talk about scary movies, creepy memories and experiences, and we even do D&D style campaigns in horror scenarios, like when we tracked down the Alaskan Wendigo. Watching, subscribing, and liking our videos on Night Watchers is huge. Thank you all so much for your help. With your support, I know we can make it through this. I don't want to keep you too long now. So today, on Unexplained Encounters, I've got a goodie bag of various new and creepy stories about deer gods, disturbing ghosts in the basement, things in the corner, and more. Send us your stories at darkstories.org and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Pretty please and thank you. Now, let's begin. The Thing That Followed Me. From Grey Dan. I listen to this show at work, and I want to thank you for even doing this podcast. It helps the hours go by. Now, this is the first time I've ever sent anything in, so I hope you're patient with me. This happened in 2016. In my personal life, I've only told about 6 people this story, so I won't be using my real name here. To start, I'll give some background. I got sober in 2013. My sponsor at the time told me I needed something to do between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. at night. You see, that's when I used to drink, and he wanted me to keep my mind and my body off of it. So I started to hike. A few years later, I was doing a lot of night hikes. I'm no courageous hero or anything. I didn't prefer doing it at night. I just got off at work at 5:30, and that's when my free time was, and I didn't feel like sitting around in my apartment. The road I drove was about 40 minutes east of me in the Cascades. It's an old fire road. Imagine a dirt road, which cuts through the woods for logging trucks and fire equipment. There's a gate with a sign on it at the bottom so no cars just go on through. It reaches up about 1,000 feet and goes over 4 miles. The woods on either side are thick. You can't even see 10 feet in during the daytime. At night, the road is lit, but both sides where the woods are, well, those become dark walls. I walked that road all the time over those years. I say that because if I heard or saw something strange, as you'll soon see in this story, I know what is out there, and this was not something that should be out there. It was July. I was about 2.5 miles up heading out, and at a certain point I began to hear footsteps behind me. When you're walking on gravel like that, you can hear your own footsteps louder than anything else. So when I was certain I was hearing another set of footsteps, I began to test it. Sure enough, those other footsteps were about a half beat behind my own, and would stop shortly after I stopped. Immediately I thought this had to be an echo. The way the road was shaped, it wasn't impossible. I've yelled out there loud enough to test it, and there was a definite echo. I began walking again, and of course, after a beat, the other footsteps appeared. I stopped again, and this time there was one extra step after I stopped. Just one more, then nothing. It was silent all around. I turned around then, shining a flashlight down the road. There was nothing there, not as far as I could tell, but then again I could only see about 80 feet at the most. Still, I did not handle that well. I began to walk much faster, which after a minute made my chest hurt, and I did not turn around again. Not long after, I was going up the same road, about a mile in. There was still some light out, near dusk, so I didn't have the flashlight on my headlamp on yet. I swear something came down the bank on my left, through the brush. It was up ahead of me. It crossed the road, then went down the other side. This lasted about 2 seconds altogether. I saw it on the road. The road is lighter than everything else around it, so seeing something on it causes a clear silhouette. What I saw was on 4 legs and was about the size of a big dog, kind of like a German Shepherd. But everything from the hip back was way too long. It didn't walk or run like a dog. Instead, it was doing these bounding motions, like the back end coming up like a rabbit. The head was level with the shoulders, and strangely shaped. My brain said dog right away, but immediately course-corrected, saying, no, that's no canine. But by then it was already about to disappear. When it was gone, I began to tell myself it was a coyote, and I made myself believe that for the next year. I'd seen a coyote at about 20-25 yards away at dusk. That was my best guess. What was weird, though, was that where it bounded up from was 4 or 5 feet of straight dirt with brush hanging over it, something a dog would have to scramble up, even a big and athletic dog. But this thing, like a kangaroo, had done it in one bounding motion. I kept hiking that road. I'm a stubborn person, and I don't like to sacrifice my routines. One night, I'd had a bad day. I ended up hiking later than usual. I was coming back down around 10:30. It was a clear and cold night with no moon above at all. My headlamp was on, illuminating about 80 feet in front of me. Everything else around the cone of light was solid black. About 3 miles down, I heard familiar footsteps. They were behind me, doing that monkey see, monkey do crap, where I would hear it only for a beat after I stopped. But this time I did not stop, not after I realized the footsteps were there. I kept going, and I even spoke out loud. "I know you're out there." I was creeped out. If it was an animal, maybe my voice would scare it. Then again, it was nice just to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. Kept me from feeling too freaked out. Whatever it was keeping pace with me. I recalled what they tell you to do during a wild animal encounter. Get big, get loud. So I turned around and shot my arms up, and I began to yell, nearly scream. I even swung my light down the road frantically. But there was nothing on the road behind me. Then I saw the brush on the right side, about 30 feet back, starting to move. A big section of it was going down and up, like something heavy had shifted it. Then I heard a sound. It started like a low chest-range groan, and it went up in pitch until it sounded like a woman's scream. Then it broke. It just stopped instantly with no fade, just a complete and sudden cutoff. The screaming sound lasted a total of about 5 seconds. Now, everyone says cougar, the people I've told this to. 1 or 2 people have told me it was an elk. I've looked into dozens of cougar recordings after this, and it sounded nothing like what I heard out there. Yes, a cougar can sound like a dying woman, but it's much higher pitched and steadier, and doesn't have that sudden break-off. I listened to bull elk too, and that has a sort of whistling to it, but there was no whistle anywhere in what I heard. This had a throat and gutturalness, if that's a word. It sounded like it came from a human throat. Someone good at doing animal voices, but you can still tell they're human. Immediately after I heard that, I ran as fast as I could. I was 39 years old, and I ran 3 miles down that road in the dark, praying that I wasn't about to break my leg. About halfway down, I did fall and cut my palm open pretty good, but I got up, ignored it, and kept on going. The whole way down, whatever it was, stayed with me on the right side, in the brush. It never came onto the road that night. I could hear it close, and I wasn't hearing its footsteps now, but rather the brush itself being moved and shifted, a big rustling keeping pace with me, only a few feet off the road, and every so often it would stop for a couple of seconds and then play catch-up. There's a gravel bend at the gate where you park, and when I came within 100 yards of that spot, it stopped following me, just gave up. When I got to my car, breathless, I sat there, panting and having to remember to blink. I decided then and there as I began to drive away that I was not going to come back to that road. My night hikes in this area were done for good. A while later, I was telling a guy at a meeting about it, just the short version of my story, when this quiet woman I knew, who rarely said a single word, leaned over and asked which road I saw it on, so I told her. She told me that her brother-in-law has a place out that way, and that 2 or 3 times in the winter, they had something come around the house overnight, something that went through their burn pile. One time it took a deer carcass off the hooks in the carport, which itself is about 7 feet up on a beam. The crazy part? They have a lot of dogs, and those dogs bark at everything. The occasional bear, the actual mountain lions out there, and of course coyotes and other dogs. But whenever this thing came around, her brother-in-law says he could always tell when it was here, because the dogs would not bark at it. They refused to make a sound when it was around. In fact, one time during the winter, when they heard it walking around the side of the house, 2 of their dogs got up and went to stand at the back door, begging to be let in with quiet whimpers. And so they did, because they didn't know what it was out there, but it certainly seemed big enough to be dangerous. That's probably the creepiest thing I've ever heard about a scary story in real life. Something that dogs don't even bark at? Dogs love to bark. I've got a corgi, and it won't shut up at squirrels or the neighbor's corgi. A dog that won't bark is either too old, too depressed, or it's about to mess its britches. So yeah, that's my story. These days I hike in the daylight, because that creature gave me a big healthy fear of the nighttime. My girlfriend, who I live with, thinks it's real funny that I refuse to take the trash out after dark. But when you have woods within view and it's after dark, yeah, no thanks, she can do it. The Corner of Mom's Room. From KMR. As a 38-year-old woman, this is the only thing like this that has ever happened to me, before or since. I'll start by saying that my mother died in 2019. It was from pancreatic cancer. Luckily, she was at home when it happened. That's what she wanted. I had moved back in with her for the last part of it and to help out. I'd been living in Denver before, so I had to give up my apartment and I came home to Rockford, Illinois. I have no regrets, and I would do it all over again for my mom. Her house is 2 stories and was built in 1954. It has 3 upstairs bedrooms. We used a hospital bed, putting it on the bottom floor, so that she wouldn't have to go up and down the stairs. This was in a spare room, and I would sleep on the couch in that same room with her for months. About 1 month before my mom passed, she began to talk to somebody in the corner of the room. I was actually prepared for this. The hospice had given us a booklet, and one of the nurses had walked me through it. Dying people do talk to people who aren't there, usually relatives who had passed before them. It's a very, very common thing. Doesn't mean it's not just in their heads. The nurse told me herself, "Look, it's gonna happen. Be prepared. Don't be scared." I kept nodding 100 times a minute, and I thought I was ready. When my mom started to do this, I wasn't scared. She would look at the corner by the front window, right by the curtain, then have an entire conversation with someone I couldn't see. She would even laugh sometimes. One time she told whoever it was that they were being crazy. Whoever my mom was seeing, I'm glad she was having a good time. I would ask on occasion who she was talking to. A couple of times she told me Adele. Adele is her sister, my aunt, who died back in 1991. Another time she said, "the man." So I asked her which man she meant. She told me the one that comes with Adele. Before I could get more information on that, she asked for water and would not answer any more questions after. But again, I was told this was all textbook stuff. The booklet had every bit of it. Her last 2 weeks, she really couldn't talk at all, not more than just a word or 2. She was sleeping almost all the time. It was around then I was afraid she might not wake up. One night, about 5 days before she died, I woke up on the couch at some point in the night. I looked over and saw that my mom was awake, and she was looking at the corner. She lifted her hand a few inches off the blanket, and at that time even that was a real effort for her. But she managed to hold it there. Of course, as I always did when she began to talk to the person in the corner, I looked over, just to be sure we were alone. When I looked over, I saw a shape in the corner. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't some glowing or see-through apparition. It didn't even have a face. Whatever it was, that corner was darker than the rest of the wall, and as I looked around, I couldn't understand why. The streetlight comes in through that window, but it wouldn't be casting a shadow like that on the wall. But this was different than a shadow. It had harder, darker edges to it. and it was about as tall and narrow as a person, a skinny person. I practically stared at the thing for about 15 seconds. Then I sat up, changing my angle to see if it was still there. It was no optical illusion. Then I tried putting my hand up in the streetlight to see if I could cast a shadow in that direction. But no, it wasn't landing there in the corner. Around then, my mom put her hand back down, then closed her eyes. I looked back at the corner. The darkness was gone. The strange, dark shape was no longer there. That was the full, strange experience. If you were expecting a jump scare of a shadowy figure jumping at me or touching me, well, nothing else happened. Mom passed 5 days after that, and as I feared, she just didn't wake up one morning. No matter how much you think you're ready to see your mother pass, there's no being ready for that kind of thing. It's a terrible thing that we all have to go through at some point, and I wish you all the best of luck. Regarding the shadowy thing, I have no theory about what it is, but I pray it was an angel, prepping her for her journey soon to come. Mom never did seem scared at what was in the corner, so whatever it was, I like to think it was safe and good. Something spoke in the holiday flat. From Tom W. This happened to us in Belgium of 2018. There were 4 of us who were there, so we can all corroborate the encounter. I was 24. Me and my girlfriend at the time and 2 mates from university rented a flat in Ostend for 5 nights. Ostend is a seaside town on the North Sea, and it's not some creepy or haunted-looking place. It's where old Belgian folk go to eat some waffles. Our flat was at the top floor of a very thin building. It had some very steep stairs, 3 bedrooms total, and a kitchen with a window onto a light well. During our second night there, at around 2 a.m., all 4 of us were in the sitting room. Nobody was asleep yet. We were just hanging out and drinking. I remember Tim showing me a video on his phone. Suddenly, coming from the kitchen and clear as day, there came a woman's voice. Now, I couldn't tell you what she said, and neither can my friends, but it sounded like 3 words. It was spoken in a normal voice, like someone in the next room just trying to tell you something. However, we all argue about whether it was a different language or not. Tim thought it was Flemish, but to me it didn't even sound like a language we knew. My girlfriend thought it was English, claiming she heard 2 words, and that the second one was definitely the word coming. She swears by that to this day. When it happened, all 4 of us reacted simultaneously. It's funny looking back, but at that very moment, all 4 of our heads turned, like a very creeped-out machine. Tim got up and went over to the kitchen. He flicked on the light, but didn't see anyone in there. There's not anywhere for a person to hide in that kitchen. It was only about 2 by 3 meters, and no one could have snuck out. Sure, there was that window to the light well, but they could not have climbed out in that time, and not that quietly. The day after, we asked the woman who managed the flat. We wanted to know if the place was haunted. We asked in just such a way that we could play it off that we were joking if she thought we were crazy. But she was not laughing. She first asked which room, which itself was a red flag, because most people would say, "What did you hear?" or "What did you see?" We told her it was in the kitchen. She nodded, looking at the guy who was next to her and saying something in Flemish. Then she switched back to English and told us that the flat below had been empty for 2 years, then followed up by asking if we wanted a different flat. We all looked at each other then, eyebrows raised. My friend Kier, the other guy that I'd left out until now in this story, says she was just playing with us. I mean, 4 drunk English kids are a pretty easy target. All you gotta say is the place is haunted and we go, "Whoa." But she never looked like she was just joking. She looked dead serious, and she even had a backup plan. If that ghost is being too loud, would you like a different flat? Well, we stayed and nothing else happened. Not gonna lie, we wanted something else to happen because we actually thought it was cool and creepy. But after our stay, we went back home, and we only had that one-part story to tell, which is what I'm here to share with you. So there it is. We stayed in a flat and heard a woman's voice in the next room. Voices behind the curtain. From Ricky. Hey, been listening since the beginning. My wife thinks I'm crazy for having this on when I fall asleep. Anyway, here's my story. I'm 47 now, but this happened in 2014, so I would be in my mid-30s. I had my gallbladder out. Normally that's an outpatient procedure and you go home. But of course it goes wrong for me. I ended up running a fever, so they kept me for a couple of nights. This was in a hospital in Toledo. I was in a room with a couple of beds and a curtain track between them, so no real privacy really. I had the bed by the door too, which I did not prefer. The other bed by the window had a man in it. He was already there when I got there, and by the time I left, he was still there. I never did see the guy, not once, not even a part of him. The curtain was pulled shut the entire time, which was 2 nights and a day and a half. The first night I was very much out of it. Anesthesia and all that had me going loopy, but I had a pump for the pain, so it wasn't so bad. I was going in and out of sleep, for the most part. Is that sleep or unconsciousness? Anyway, I heard him talking that very first night. He wasn't talking to me, but I wasn't sure at first, so I said, "Hello?" But he didn't reply, so I just sat there, listening. It almost sounded like he was on the phone, talking low and quiet. This went on for a while. So long, in fact, I was starting to get a little annoyed. But eventually I went back to sleep. The day after that, my sister came by. She sat with me for a few hours. She noticed the curtain, then asked if the guy over there was all right because he was so quiet. I said I didn't know, and I really didn't. She went to the gap in the curtain and tried to say hi, which defies the reason the curtain's even there. But she didn't get a reply either. Later that afternoon, a woman came in. I wasn't sure if it was a nurse or an aide. She went behind the man's curtain and I heard her say his name, asking him how lunch was. So there was a man alive over there. Someone was definitely in that bed, no matter how quiet and unresponsive they were. Staff talked to him and interacted with him. They were in and out of there all day. Something happened my second night there. I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m. He was talking again, and this time I was much more conscious and aware. He was definitely not on the phone. There were gaps in his speech, short gaps, 2 seconds or 3, and when I heard talking again, it sounded like 2 people in a room going back and forth, and I could only hear one of them. Until, that is, I heard the other voice. It was much quieter than the other. It came from further back in the room, over by the window. I couldn't make out one word of that either, but I was certain there was another man's voice in the room, underneath his, and the 2 of them talked about whatever for some time. I lay there, listening, wondering who I was hearing. Now, visiting hours were long over at that point, but people bend those rules all the time, right? If it was a son or his brother wanting to sit with him at 2 a.m. at a hospital, there are nurses that will let that happen, especially if his health is not the best. So no mystery if that was the answer. As I was assuming that was the case, I didn't do anything and eventually went back to sleep. Around 6 a.m., it was getting light out. A nurse came in to do my vitals, a nurse I hadn't had before. I decided to make some small talk. "Hey, has my roommate's family gone home yet? They were chatting up a storm in the middle of the night." She gave me a weird face and said, "The man over there has not had any guests." "Are you sure? I mean, you are the nurse, but I swear I heard someone last night." She stopped what she was doing, putting her hands on her hips. Then she said, "In here?" "Yeah, around 2:30, I think." She went over behind the curtain. She was over there for about a minute. I heard her say something to the man, and I heard him give an answer, just a couple of words. Soon she came back and finished my vitals, reminding me that any night staff would log any visitor. She wasn't aware of any visitors, but she would check. She never came back to tell me anything, though. I got discharged and went home around 11. To this day, I don't know who was in that room, but I know there were 2 distinct voices coming from 2 different spots in the room next to me, or actually in the same room, which makes it a tad bit creepier. This man and his imaginary friend that was somehow real, they did their thing while I was there trying to sleep. I told my sister about this, and she thinks it was drugs they were giving me. But whatever. I hope you enjoy the story. Lady at the Bus Stop. From 929292. There's this bus stop at the bottom of my grandma's old street in Bridgeport that I would not stand near today for a grand. I grew up in Connecticut, and I spent every summer at my grandma's place from when I was little until I turned 16. Her street slopes down and dead ends into a main road with a bus stop on the corner. Just a pole and a sign. There was no shelter back then, no bench or anything of the sort. The streetlight sat about 30 feet up the road from it. Her house was the fourth one up from the bottom on the left side, and my room was the small one at the front of the stairs. Out the window of my room, you could see straight down the hill. It was 1995, and I was 11 years old. That summer I had a lot of trouble sleeping. No reason in particular, I think. I was an 11-year-old kid. I didn't like strange beds, and my cousin loved to snore. Instead, I would sit on the floor at that window at 1 in the morning, looking out at the street. There was nothing else to do anyway. But I would see a woman at the bus stop. This did not happen every single night, just occasionally. She would stand at the pole facing the road, and I wondered if she was waiting for some very late bus I'd never seen. She appeared to be an older woman, maybe in her 60s. She was wearing a coat, but even as a kid I found that strange. In July in Connecticut, people don't wear coats usually, and this was a dark and long coat going past her knees. She had something in her hand. I figured it was a bag or a purse. She was near enough to the streetlight that I could see her, but she wasn't right under it, so I can't tell you about the details of her face. I didn't find her creepy or anything. I thought she was a lady who worked late nights and was just trying to get home. Probably someone's grandma, waiting at the bus stop to go clean an office building. My own grandmother did that kind of job for years, so I had a point of reference. I saw the lady again the next summer I stayed there, and the summer after that. She would always be at the same corner in the same coat and standing just the same way. Now around 13 or 14, my brain was maturing and wising up a bit, so I noticed problems with this situation. Firstly, a bus never came for the old lady. Not one time in the last several years did I see a bus pull up to that corner that late. Never while she was there, and I did not see her get on anything or walk away. I would watch her, she would be there, and I'd get bored and go back to bed. Secondly, I got a schedule from a local pharmacy, a bus schedule. That route ran until about 11 at night and started back up around 5. So there was no bus at that corner at 2 a.m., and there never would be one. I began to wonder what the woman was even doing there. Why wait? And for what? And third, I was up late in the kitchen getting cereal one night, and my grandmother came down because she'd heard me moving about. She stood at the sink, grabbing a glass of water. The kitchen window faces the side of the house, not the street. I told my grandma then, "There's some lady at the bus stop again." My grandma did not look at the window or at me, but she said, "Don't go down there." She sounded very serious, then took her water and went back upstairs. Now, Grandma didn't have any patience of any kind for ghost talk. She always came off as the type of person who was very superstitious, but in the stay silent and stay safe way. You would not bring up demons around her. You would not talk about ghosts. In her house, they did not exist. And if they did not exist in her house, well, they did not exist in her house. So when I tried to pester her over the years about this lady at the bus stop, well, she didn't have any more to say about it to me. My grandma died in 2011, and her house would soon be sold. I went back there one more time before the house was sold, hoping to clear it out. We stayed there a couple of nights because it took a while. I was around 27, I think. I went up to that little front bedroom one night, probably around 1, and I sat on the floor at the window like an idiot, like I was a kid again, and I looked down at the hill. You know who I saw down there? Yep, the same coat, same bag, same woman facing the road. I stared at her for several minutes. I felt this sense of nostalgia and of comfort in a sad way. I think I realized then that I began to associate this ghost lady at the bus stop with my own grandmother and her house, where I'd spent so many summers at. Now that it was all coming to an end, I started to cry. I went downstairs, wiped my eyes, and went to sleep in my grandmother's room. Sometimes I wonder if I went back there right now and someone allowed me to look at that window in the middle of the night, would I see that woman standing at the bus stop still? Or would I see two, both wearing familiar faces? The Road Trip, from Bradley V. This is my most recent supernatural experience, and even now I still can't explain what happened. Before I tell you everything, though, let me explain some things first. On my mom's side of the family, believing in the supernatural has always been the norm. Growing up, I honestly thought it was just one of her hobbies. My mom loved ghost stories, haunted places, and anything paranormal. As a little kid, I figured she simply enjoyed scary things. But as I grew older, I started to notice things that didn't make sense. When I was 13 years old, we lived in an old house in the small town of Winsboro, Texas. There was nothing particularly unusual about that house from the outside, but living there never felt right. Every day I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't the normal fear of the dark or an overactive imagination. It felt like something unseen was always nearby, silently observing me. Sometimes it felt like a heavy shadow was hanging over my shoulders wherever I went. At 13, I couldn't explain what I was feeling. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask my mother about it. At first, I danced around the subject, asking little questions without directly telling her what I was experiencing. This went on for nearly a month. Every answer she gave seemed logical enough that I convinced myself I was just imagining things. One night, everything changed. We had just finished watching a movie together. As the credits rolled, she looked over at me with a serious expression, asking, "You can sense them now?" I froze. She looked at me for a few seconds before breaking the silence. "You're old enough now to understand. Our family has a sense. We can feel things that aren't supposed to be there. Sometimes we can even see things other people can't. As you get older, that sense becomes stronger, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. But eventually you'll learn how to control it. You'll learn how to shut them out." She paused before saying one final thing. "But never ignore that feeling. Always listen to it." She then stood up and said goodnight before going to bed. I tried my best to process what she just told me. Now fast forward to modern day. I'm 21 years old now, single with no kids, just living life and working like everyone else. My senses have become stronger over the years, but I've learned to ignore most of these strange feelings that come and go. Then came a certain night. One of my good friends, who I'll call M for this story, was 18. We decided to spend the day hanging out together. We left around noon and took about an hour-long road trip. We stopped for gas station snacks, laughed the whole drive, and we ended up spending the day in Longview, Texas. We played some old-school arcade games at the mall and tried an escape room. We spent way too much time at a trampoline park, and we just enjoyed ourselves. None of those things were what we were really looking forward to, though. Earlier that week, you see, I'd found information about an abandoned hospital located somewhere between Longview and Lone Star, Texas. It sounded creepy enough that we decided we'd check it out after dark. Looking back now, that was the worst decision I've ever made. After the sun went down, we drove about 30 minutes toward the location. We grabbed our flashlights and a Ouija board from the car before following an old overgrown trail leading into the woods. Almost right away, that familiar feeling returned. That feeling of being watched. Only this time it was different. It didn't feel curious or harmless. What was watching us hated us. It felt like invisible eyes burning into my skin with pure malice. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't want to scare Em, and if I'm being honest, I also had a crush on her and did not want to look afraid. Instead, I stayed alert and remembered what my mom told me years earlier. Listen to the feeling. We walked for nearly 10 minutes through thick vegetation before stepping into a large clearing. Something immediately felt wrong there. The abandoned hospital was gone. There was nothing there at all. No ruins, no foundation, nothing. Just an empty field. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that we should not be there. I took one step farther into the clearing. Suddenly it felt like I'd walked into a wall of pressure. The air became unbelievably heavy. It wasn't physical pressure, though. It was emotional, pure rage and hatred. The feeling was so overwhelming that I actually staggered backward. My hands were shaking. I noticed something then that made my blood run cold. Around the edge of our flashlight beams were patches of darkness. These were no normal shadows. The patches were darker than the night itself, and they were moving, slowly, towards us. Every time I pointed my flashlight directly at one, there was nothing there except grass. But as soon as I looked away, they moved again. I then saw one clearly. It was so much darker than everything around it, almost like the light itself disappeared where it stood. It was looking directly at me. Where eyes would be, there were only endless black voids. When my eyes met its, I understood something without a single word being spoken. It did not want to kill us. Death would be a mercy. It wanted us to suffer, and it enjoyed our fear. It fed on it. As if it realized I could actually see it, I swear it smiled. That smile is burned into my memory forever. I immediately turned to Em. "We need to leave, right now." She looked confused, so I quickly made up an excuse, saying there wasn't anything worth seeing out here anyway. Thankfully, she didn't argue. We turned around, started walking back, and I made sure not to run. But I did walk faster than ever. Every second felt like something was right behind us. Finally, we made it back to the car, and the first thing I did was turn on every light inside. Em looked at me, noticing how pale I'd become. "What's wrong?" she asked. I replied, "The lights stay on until we're out of here." She could tell I wasn't joking. As we drove away, I expected the feeling to disappear or fade, but it didn't. It stayed with us. Trying to lighten the mood, Em turned on some music. The song was Entombed by Deftones. She then switched off the interior lights, and the instant the lights went out, that feeling came back 10 times as strong. And a sound filled the car. A hissing sound. Em yelled, "What the hell is that?" Trying to stay calm, I lied to her. "It's probably the radio, some static or something." I knew it wasn't. Every window in the car began to fog up at exactly the same time. Not slowly, but rapidly. I could barely see the road and had to pull over. No matter how much we wiped at the windows, though, they would fog right back up. Em whispered to me, saying something that made my stomach drop. "I think it came from the Ouija board." As she said that, I looked into the back seat. Sitting beside the Ouija board was that same dark figure, still smiling. Without thinking, I reached into the back seat, grabbing the Ouija board and rolling down my window. I threw that thing as hard as I could into the middle of the road. Then I hit the gas. I had to lean my head out the driver's window just to see where I was going. The windshield was just too completely fogged over. When I glanced into the rear view, the Ouija board was gone, but the figure was not. Now it was standing in the road, smiling still. Its entire body seemed to vibrate in a disturbing, unnatural way, before suddenly vanishing. Slowly, every window cleared. The crushing feeling disappeared at last. It felt like whatever had been following us had finally let us go. I drove him home without saying much. Neither of us wanted to talk about what we'd experienced. That night I slept with every light in my house turned on. And sleeping was an overstatement, because I barely slept at all. I've searched online countless times trying to figure out what that thing was, but I've never found an answer. What I do know is that ever since that night, my sense has become stronger than ever. I can feel even the faintest presence no matter where I go. But nothing has ever matched what I saw that night outside Longview. I will not forget that smile or those endless black eyes. I think, whatever it may have been, it wanted us to know it was real. The Albino Spirit, from Cog Viper. I've been listening to this podcast for years, and I finally decided to try submitting my own experience. I'm a 20-year-old woman. In this story, I was 14 years old. I've lived on the East Coast for most of my life, at my aunt's house. It sits on a plot of land that is a little over an acre in a private neighborhood. It's not one of those paved cookie-cutter houses or neighborhoods, but one of those where the road looks like the surface of the moon, and people shoot their guns off at coyotes at 2 o'clock in the morning. My aunt was a nurse who worked night shifts almost every night of the week, so putting the ducks away into their shed at night was my responsibility. We lived in a double-wide mobile home that was set on a brick foundation. It had 2 entrances. We almost never used the front door due to it being blocked by a gnarly bush that never went away, even after digging up the roots. In the backyard, there were 2 sheds, one for the ducks that was surrounded with chicken wire, and another one to the back left of the house for storage. The duck shed, as we called it, faced the driveway, with the well behind it a few hundred feet ahead of where the woodline sprouted thorny underbrush. One night in October at about 11 p.m., I realized I'd forgotten to put the ducks into their shed before night fell. So I tossed on a puffy jacket before rushing to put on farm boots and stumbling outside and down the stairs. I flipped on the porch light, which I angled toward the duck shed so that I could see the gate to unlock it. All of our ducks at the time were male. We had 2 khaki ducks that we called the twins, as they were identical. Dexter was the shy twin, and Keith was the boisterous one. However, when I tried to shut the door, Keith huddled into the corner with the rest of the ducks, instead of his usual charge at the closing door. I had already felt something was off, but I tried to ignore the abnormal behavior. After locking the door and the gate behind me, I glanced at the woods behind the shed. This was not an unusual thing for me to do since we always had to watch for wild animals, which tried to get into the ducks at night. The occasional buck in the woodline was not unusual either. They enjoyed jumping over the fence in our front yard. This time, however, there was something completely different. I saw what looked like an albino buck, its huge antlers weaving in and out of each other above its head. It was bigger than any buck I'd ever seen in my life, and certainly not with that kind of antler pattern. It had to stand at least 6 feet tall. I'm 5'7" for reference. That deer stood a good amount taller than me, its nose reaching about chest height, and it stared at me straight on. It had a very broad chest, about twice the width of my shoulders, and well muscled. Its white fur almost looked like it was glowing all on its own, even with no moon shining that night. Its eyes were blank, just plain white with no veins, no pupils. Instead of being on the side of its head, it was able to stare straight ahead at me without turning. I was terrified, but not because I thought it was going to hurt me. We looked at each other for about 2 seconds, but the message to me was clear. It was like it was telling me to go about my business, and there would be nothing to worry about. I didn't feel any malicious intent from this creature, but I also couldn't be sure that if I did anything but turn around and go back inside, it wouldn't go well for me. So that's exactly what I did. I continued turning back towards the house, calmly walking back to the porch and up the steps, closing the side door quietly and locking it. I swear my heart was going to burst. I was sweating profusely as soon as the lock clicked into place. I'd never seen something so beautiful, yet so eerie in my entire life, before or since. I really don't know what it was, but I believe it could have been some kind of protective spirit. Either way, I'm glad I followed my aunt's rule of, if you saw something, no you didn't. I did not want to accidentally antagonize whatever it was. While it was truly an amazing experience, I'm glad I haven't met it again. Jasper, the quite unfriendly ghost. From Prophetic Potato. I've always believed in spirits. Even raised as a Christian, I'd always told myself that there was nothing in Jesus' teaching that spoke against the existence of the paranormal. And in fact, he even hinted that ghosts did exist, but they sure as heck shouldn't be messed with. Yes, I'm well aware that's not exactly what he said, and I know that my Bible is 5 feet across my room, but I've not the energy nor the expertise to read a syllable from it. But if there's anything I've learned from the Bible, it's that Jesus is pretty good to listen to, and he's darned right about not frolicking with ghosts. But here I am messing with my good old buddy Jasper, the ghost that likes to get on my nerves even more frequently than my roommate across the hall. I actually happen to be the idiot that made this situation. I had 2 mirrors to place in my brand new apartment, and the 2 best places for them after most of my furniture had been moved in was slightly offset of across from each other. The 2-inch-long gap where they intersected was where Jasper slipped into my life. If you're seasoned in the paranormal field, or you're like my 9-year-old niece and just watch a crap ton of Sam and Colby, then you likely know that mirrors that face each other are one of the many places things out of this world are thought to pass through to get to ours. Otherwise known as a portal. Did I know this at the time? Of course. Did I acknowledge it? No. That's not how my neurodivergent mind is wired. It was after over 5 months of living in my apartment that I finally noticed that little gap may or may not have amounted to something. I would find earrings lying on my desk, in the exact spot I naturally spotted when getting ready for the day, a place I would have never set them. I would take them out to shower, set them on my shelf, and find them right back on the desk. I even tested this once, left, and found an identical set in Jasper's new favorite spot. I've always had some insane prophetic dreams, so I decided to hang up an old dream catcher I was gifted by some weird lady that my mom became friends with after going to her house to pick up something obscure she bought from Facebook Marketplace. It's pretty basic, to be honest, but sometimes when I get scared of the cardboard cutout of the Kung Fu Panda guy, don't ask, I'm convinced it's alive. And in that case, I ask quite politely for a peaceful dream, only to get the most out-of-the-blue thing imaginable to the human mind. It was in one of these dreams that I learned Jasper's name, or at least the name I know him by now. Some ominous voice that reminded me too much of an annoying sibling that just straight up giggled, and I quote, "It's me, Jasper." I remember thinking, what the flying frolic? Also Jasper, like Casper? But yeah. Sometimes I'll jolt awake and yell Jasper at the top of my lungs, to which my roommate never fails to follow up with, "Yeah, what the frick, Jasper?" His words, not mine. He's not as frequent a user of frolic, unfortunately. And these aren't the last of his antics. Weird noises, things moving, clothes unfolding, Google lights being tapped on after I just asked my lovely British friend to turn it off via voice command. Heck, what hasn't he done to mess with me? Nonetheless, though, I do like Jasper. The title I gave this post is pretty misleading, although he did turn on my LED strobe lights under my loft bed last night, and I'd just gotten into bed too. It was so bad my roommate had to turn them off at about 4 a.m. last night because he was so fed up. He even left a note reading simply, "Jasper, why?" Poor guy. I consider him my little platonic housewife. Even though I do beat him up a little more than he signed up for when we moved in together for college, he's not a prankster. The level of mischievous that Jasper is would only exhaust him. Well, Jasper says hi, everyone, but I'm too tired to deal with him. Cheers. Poltergeist in the Basement. From Sandman 67. This still gives me goosebumps. When I was 9 years old, my parents wanted some time to themselves for a bit, for their anniversary. So they had me stay with my aunt and my siblings with my other aunt. My aunt got a new apartment recently. I was excited to go over to her new place because wherever she lived, I had a blast anyway with my cousins. But on that day, this was at the new apartment. Sadly, my cousins were nowhere to be found. Apparently, they were staying the night somewhere else. So it was just me and my aunt. My aunt went ahead and set me up in the basement, but the way she was doing it, it was like she was trying to get out of there before a bomb went off or something. So I was sitting down there playing with some toys, when I feel something pull on my shirt. All I felt was goosebumps and a sense that something was in there with me. I was getting really scared, so I went and knocked on the basement door, explaining to my aunt after she answered what happened. But she told me there was nothing down there, and at the same time, she refused to come and check it out. She warned that she would call my parents and I would get in trouble. So I said okay and went to bed with the lights on. As I was trying to sleep, I felt something pull my leg. I was too tired at the time, so I just ignored it. Eventually, I woke up again to another yank on my leg, and I quickly became alert. The lights were off now, even though I had turned them on. The sheets were coming off of me slowly, and I freaked out when whatever it was yanked my leg one more time, nearly pulling me off the bed. I froze for a moment, trying to analyze the situation. I decided to make a break for the basement door to open it. To my surprise, it would not open, so I started to bang on the door, trying to force it open, and at this point I'm screaming to my auntie to let me out, as I'm peeking over my shoulder trying to see if something was coming after me. She finally opened the door and said the door was never locked. But I explained it had to be because it wouldn't open. She was very annoyed at this point and told me she'd be calling my parents. I said I don't care, call them, and I left the basement just as I felt something pull my shirt at the same time, as if letting me know it could have hurt me whenever it wanted to. I rushed towards the front door, trying to get out of that apartment altogether. I would wait for my parents outside, but my auntie talked me into waiting for them inside. Probably understandably, I was very paranoid by then. I felt as though something was watching me, and it felt like forever before my mom finally came to the door. When she arrived, I ran so fast out there to hug her. My mom was confused. I had never been that afraid in my life. She questioned my auntie about it, but auntie acted confused too. My mom wanted me to come back into the apartment again, and I said heck no. And just as I said that, the basement light came on and the door shut by itself really hard. My mom ran out of there fast. She got mad at my auntie, assuming that my auntie knew something was down there and yet put her son down there with it. The two of us walked to the car, where my dad was. My dad asked my mother what happened, and my mom was so spooked she didn't want to speak. So I explained to my dad what happened. He said that place has to be haunted then. So me and my siblings never stayed at my auntie's apartment ever again. Now that I think about it, my cousins probably experienced the same thing, and they chose to stay the night somewhere else. I mean, they never missed the chance to spend time with their favorite cousin, and vice versa. The paranormal is real, everyone, and I felt it firsthand. What kind of messed up aunt do you have to be to lock your nephew or niece in the basement with Jeffrey Ghoststein? That story really creeped me out. It's one thing to encounter a ghost, but to be forced into a room with one after the fact, well, that's just messed up, dude. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. All I ask today is for you to help me save my Night Watchers channel on YouTube. Click that link in the description, or search for Night Watchers on YouTube. Subscribe, watch, and like some of our videos, and I think you'll have an amazing time. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Yo, unless I've gone completely senile, and that might be the case, let's be real, I'm aging faster than Asmongold, I think this is our 200th episode. So thank you all insanely much for sticking with me for 200 whole episodes of me never figuring out how to shut up. You're all the best. Quick warning though, I had a hankering for some school-related stories on this one, and I feel like school is kind of like work for people who don't have a career yet, so it counts. Anyway, prepare for skinwalkers, a glitch at Aldi, and extremely haunted schools. These are tales from the break room. And you should leave us a review or follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Ghost at My Law School. From Bob Wassabort. A few years ago, I attended law school in LA. I'd heard rumors it was haunted when I first started, and as a believer in the supernatural, I tried to stay away from spots at the school where people had seen spirits. I've encountered ghosts and what I'm sure was a demon before, making me wary of what people report as ghosts. While at school, I had multiple encounters with an entity that called herself Sharon, as well as other spirits. The first was late at night in the school's library. The library had 3 floors with a basement, ground, and second floor. I tried to stay on the ground and second floors, as the basement always scared me. It was designed in a way where if you whispered just right, it would always sound like a person was right next to you. It was also where one of the 2 restrooms was. I left my study group to use the restroom. When I got into the basement and turned the corner to the restroom, I saw a woman in an old vintage red dress. She reminded me of a secretary for some reason. She walked down the hall, and as I was curious who she was, I followed her. That hallway ended with a wide-open room filled with corrals and a dead end, with the only way out being behind me. When I got there, she was nowhere to be found, and I know for a fact I had not seen her come back down the hallway towards me. While I was walking around, I asked out loud, "Who's there?" I could feel something, and something whispered back, "Sharon." I left that basement so fast, my study group was confused as to why I was packing up like a madman. For the next 3 years, I only went into that basement whenever the sun was out. I'm also sure the woman I saw was not Sharon, but that's for later. The second encounter I had was on the second floor of the library, funny enough. My friend, I'll call her Elle, and I were getting ready for exams. We were in the library near closing. The second floor had a hallway of study rooms that were quite popular. All night I'd walked up and down, seeing who might still be there. We were in the last study room on our side of the hall, and by this point, there was no one else around. At closing, the lights to the rooms automatically go off, and when they did for us, we began to pack up to leave, as we both lived on campus. We were pretty spooked already, since it was darkish and no one was around. When I opened the door, we both heard what sounded like children laughing and playing. Elle told me, "Run," and we did. As we ran, we heard this loud thud above us, which was odd as there was no other upper floor on this side of the building. We looked at each other as the sound kept going, and we heard a man yell before the last thud on the roof. We ran all the way to the stairs, and by the time we hit the landing halfway to the ground floor, I could feel something watching us. I told Elle then, "Whatever you do, don't look back." I had no idea what was behind us, but I had the strangest feeling it was a woman. All I knew was if we did turn to look, we would not like what we saw. The librarian saw us running out the door, but looked as if it wasn't the first time it ever happened. After that, Elle and I never studied till closing again. The last major encounter I had was during finals of my first year. Like I said, I lived on campus, and I was close with a lot of the other students who did as well. I had an open door policy where no matter what time it was, people could stop by, and many did, like Elle or another friend I'd grown close to. One night I was woken up by my doorbell. All the apartments had these obnoxiously loud bells that filled the room. It was unmistakable. I looked at my phone and saw it was 3 a.m. I was confused, but thought maybe Elle or my other friend were up late and were freaking out over our first exam that week. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. That should have been my first clue. When I opened the door, I had the distinct feeling of someone walking past me. I thought it was strange, but I've never been so wrong in my life. When I sat on my bed, I experienced something I'd only encountered one other time, when I had run into what I was sure was a demon. My vision split. I was looking through my eyes and the eyes of another person, but from the corner of my room. Something was looking at me. I could feel her anger and hatred, and it was focused directly on me. I could then see a woman in all white with long black hair staring at me, but also I could see myself on the bed. I was terrified, almost rooted in place. I was raised Catholic, and I kept a rosary on my nightstand. In that moment, the part of my brain not paralyzed by fear willed my hand to grab it, and I began to pray. I've prayed 1,000 times in my life, but this time I felt as if I was praying for my life. A part of me knew this was Sharon. It was familiar somehow. I prayed for 30 minutes. The whole time I felt as if I was in a tug-of-war with Sharon's will. At some point, she vanished, and my vision returned to normal. I felt exhausted though, but I was too scared to fall asleep. I don't remember falling asleep, but I know that I woke up to my doorbell again. When I looked this time, it was my friend, Kay, at the door. I let her in, but when I looked down, there was a bare footprint on my door seal. The outlines of toes were unmistakable, and Kay saw them too. They weren't there the day before. My parents came by that day, and I believe my mother and I share this ability to sense the supernatural. When she walked into the apartment, she looked at me like something was off. When I got a moment to speak to her alone, she asked if something had been in my apartment, and I told her yes. The next 3 years I had multiple other smaller encounters with Sharon, but nothing like that night. I've only been that scared on 2 other occasions with the supernatural. I still have that rosary within reach of my bed years later, and it will stay there until I pass on to the next life. Something lives in the fields around my campus. From Danny D123. I've lived in Michigan my entire life. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area, went to high school in Saginaw, and now attend a small college in southern Michigan. I'm going to keep the name of the school itself private for the sake of anonymity. It's a small college, fewer than 2,000 students, sitting smack dab in the middle of nowhere. The closest major city is about a 45-minute drive away, and getting to campus means passing endless farm fields and small towns that don't offer much more than a Dollar General and a blinking yellow light. I don't mind this change of pace though. I've lived in the suburbs and city my whole life, so it's been fun for me to live in a rural area for a change. The town is quiet, and the campus is beautiful in many ways, especially in the winter when the snow is falling. Because of where the college is located, wildlife regularly wanders through campus. Deer are the most common larger animal that comes through, and they've become so used to the students that you can walk within a few feet of them without them even lifting their heads. Most of the area's wildlife is harmless. Most of it, but not all. The first time I saw this creature, I was walking back to my dorm from the library late into the night. It was after 1 in the morning, and the library had just closed. The snow was falling lightly, just enough to blur the edges of everything. My dormitory was located on the very edge of campus, about a 10-minute walk from the library. Beyond it were open fields, a patch of forest, and a small park owned by the college far off in the distance. As I walked along the sidewalk, beginning to wish I'd brought a heavier jacket, I glanced down the road toward my dorm. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, only the snow-covered fields and the dull glow of a distant streetlight. But when I looked again, something was stepping out of the trees under the streetlight. At first, I assumed it was a dog of some sort. It looked like one from that distance. Maybe it was a stray or a farm dog that had gotten loose. But as it stepped fully into the light, I realized something was very wrong. It was enormous, larger than any dog I'd ever seen, and the way it moved wasn't right. It seemed to crawl on all fours, but not in the way a dog would. That was because whatever this thing was did not have regular front paws. What it had instead looked like oversized, heavily furred human hands. That was enough for me. I sprinted toward my dorm, slipping on the frozen ground, but managing to reach the door in record time. I never heard anything chase me, but I didn't look back. As far as I know, that creature never noticed me at all, but I wasn't going to sit around and wait for it to do that. For a while after this event, I tried explaining away what I'd seen. I told myself it was just exhaustion from studying, that the snow and darkness had distorted my vision, that it had been a normal, but oversized dog. However, nothing I came up with fully settled. Deep down, I knew what I'd seen could not be explained. But eventually, classes and exams pushed the memory of the encounter aside. Midterms turned into finals, and before I knew it, the semester was over. The next time I saw the creature was during the first semester of my sophomore year. It was still early in the semester, but classes were getting difficult. I was studying in my dorm room on the 3rd floor. From my window, I could see the wide field behind the building. Looking out, I saw a group of deer packed tightly together at the far end of the field. Something shot out across the field and caught my attention. I knew instantly what it was. The creature was sprinting across the field at an unnatural speed. It launched itself at one of the deer, which barely had any time to react. It slammed into the deer, tearing into its side with powerful jaws. Then, as if the deer weighed almost nothing to it, the creature lifted the thing off the ground and carried it off into the trees. I sat at my desk long after it was gone, frozen with fear and bewilderment. After that, I avoided the edges of campus at all costs, as much as I possibly could, especially after dark, which wasn't easy given the campus's small size. I even considered switching dorms to a building closer to the center of campus. But in the end, I stayed where I was, not wanting to leave my friends and the nice room I had. A month after that, I had my third and final encounter. I was driving home for the weekend, but due to an on-campus event, which ran later than expected, the sun had already set. As I drove down the road leading away from campus, I noticed something lying in the left lane. As I got closer, I realized it was a deer. This deer, however, had not been hit by a car. Deep gouges had been torn through its side, as if massive fangs had ripped the flesh to ribbons. I slowed down, got over to the other side of the road, and passed it, feeling uneasy. Then I checked my rearview mirror. Standing in the middle of the road, beside the mutilated deer, was the same creature. This time, I could see it clearly. It had to be 8 feet tall. Black and gray fur covered a heavily muscle-bound body. Its mouth was full of long fangs, dripping with what looked like blood. And it wasn't on all fours. It was standing upright on 2 legs, watching me. I floored it. I don't know why it didn't chase me. It easily could have. I'd already seen how fast it could move. Instead, it just stood there, staring as I sped away. I never saw it again. Whatever it was, it never seemed all that interested in me, thank God. I'm very grateful for that. Still, knowing something like that exists somewhere near where I live keeps me awake some nights. It's been nearly a year since my last encounter. Whether it left the area to find new hunting grounds or is still roaming the fields around my college, I'm not sure. But I won't be upset if I never have to see it again. The Original Inhabitant, from Creek Peeper 22. I stopped telling this story out loud because people always want me to turn it into a joke. I can't do that without feeling stupid. I can still picture one part of it too clearly, and once you see something like that, it sits in your head for a very long time. In 2012, I was a sophomore at a college in Oregon. That fall, it rained all the time. The dorm I lived in was one of those older brick buildings that had been quote-unquote updated a dozen times without ever really feeling modern. The carpet was always damp, and the air always smelled faintly of detergent because the laundry room was in the basement, and the vents never did their job quite right. The building was 4 floors with a basement. The layout was simple. 1 long hallway on each floor, doors on both sides, a lounge near the stairwell, vending machines at the far end. You could hear everything through the walls. So most nights, you would hear someone's music, people in the hallway, the occasional argument, and somebody laughing out loud. There was also the story everybody knew by the second week. They called it the Walker, though I've also heard it called the Surveyor. Depends on who you talk to. The actual details change here and there, but the core of the story is always the same. Late at night, you would hear slow footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Sometimes you would hear them above you, even when you were on the top floor. Sometimes the steps would stop outside a door for a long time. People claimed they could feel when it was outside their door. I didn't take this seriously. I'd lived in enough old buildings to know they make noise. Could be pipes clicking or floors settling. People act weird in dorms because they're tired and half drunk and want a story. The only part of the legend that stands out to me was what older students would say when they got quiet. They would say it wasn't a dorm ghost. They would say the land had history and the building set on something the school never talked about. They never had a solid explanation as to what that was, which was part of what made it stick for me. It was just vague enough, so anybody could fit it to whatever they already believed. But I filed it away as dorm nonsense, until late one Friday night. A bunch of us ended up in my room because my roommate, Ethan, had a bottle, and we were bored. It was raining hard enough that you could hear it through the window, even with the music turned up. There were 8 people in a room built for 2. We had a laptop going with a playlist. We had cheap cups. Nobody was trying to be deep, and it was just one of those nights. Someone suggested Truth or Dare, because we were 19, and we were out of other ideas. It started out dumb and normal. Text somebody, do a shot, go ask the RA something stupid. People were laughing. It was loud enough that someone 2 doors down yelled at us through the wall. Then Nicole, who lived on our floor, said we should do a dorm dare. She said it like she was proud of herself for thinking of it. She asked if we'd heard the story about the 4th floor and the service hallway. Everybody had heard some version, but I hadn't heard all the details. Nicole said that there was an unmarked door on the 4th floor near the vending machines. Behind it was a narrow hallway used by maintenance. At the end, there was a metal door that was usually locked. The dare was to go there, knock 3 times, then ask, "Is anyone walking tonight?" I remember laughing, saying that sentence sounded ridiculous out loud. A couple people laughed at me, but Nicole did not. Ethan did, and that was the problem. Ethan loved dares. He loved being the guy who did the dumb thing first. So he said he would do it. I told him we were not doing that. But he said we were. 2 other people said they would come too, which made it feel safer. I ended up going because I didn't want Ethan going off with a couple of half-drunk guys to the 4th floor. We left the room and the hallway noise dropped behind us. The dorm at night always felt different once you stepped out of a loud room. The lights made everything look washed out. The carpet was darker in the center where people walked most. You could smell wet shoes. We took the stairs up, 3rd floor, then the 4th. By the time we hit the 4th floor landing, the air felt colder. I noticed it right away. Ethan didn't say anything, but he slowed down. The 4th floor hallway was empty. No doors down, no voices, no TV noise. It wasn't dead silent because you could still hear the building, but it felt closed off. The vending machines at the end made their usual sounds. Nicole had described an unmarked door. There it was. Beige like the walls. So I'd probably walked past it before without even noticing or caring. There was a faded sign on it that said, "Authorized personnel only." Ethan went over, pushed it, and it opened. Inside was a narrow cinder block hallway. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A single bulb in a wire cage lit the middle of the hall. The air smelled off, like mud. It didn't smell like a typical basement. It smelled more like dirt after rain. At the end was a flat gray metal door. No window, just a plate and a keyhole. Ethan turned, then grinned at us. But his grin looked a bit nervous. He went ahead and knocked 3 times. The knocking echoed down the hallway and came back in a way I didn't like. The sound felt bigger than the space should have allowed. Then Ethan said the line, "Is anyone walking tonight?" Nothing happened for a second. I almost relaxed. I nearly felt stupid for being so tense about it. But then we heard a footstep. It sounded like it was above us, which made no sense as we were on the 4th floor. Then I realized it wasn't above us, it was behind us, in the service hallway, coming from the direction of the door we had just used. Another step, then another. Slow steps, close enough that I could tell it was not the usual building noise. It sounded like someone putting their full weight down on each step. One of the guys whispered, "Stop it." He sounded scared. Nobody had done anything, though. Ethan took a step backward until his shoulder hit the metal door. I could see his throat moving when he swallowed. The footsteps kept coming. They didn't speed up, nor did they slow down. I turned to look down the service hallway toward the door we came in through. But it was empty. There was nowhere someone could hide. It was just a straight hallway. The light did not reach the doorway well, but I could still see the outline. Nobody was there. The footsteps stopped about 10 feet behind us, and the air grew freezing cold. It felt harder to breathe, not because I was choking, but because my body was trying to stay quiet. That's when the bulb in the wire cage flickered and went out. Ethan pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam was shaky. It lit up the cinder block walls and the pipes. That's when I saw the handprints. They were on the wall to our left, wet and dark. They weren't dusty. They had edges. You could see finger shapes. They started at about waist height and continued upward in a staggered line, higher than any of us could reach without standing on something. Ethan whispered, "No." From the metal door in front of us, we heard a scratch. It sounded like nails dragging slowly across paint. Ethan stepped away from the door so fast that he nearly hit me. He swung the flashlight beam around, and it caught more wet marks on the pipes. Then, on the ceiling. I stood there staring at the ceiling, because my brain could not accept what I was seeing. The scratch came again, longer now. Then a voice spoke from behind us. It was quiet, but it wasn't far away. It was close enough to make my skin tighten, and it sounded exactly like the words, "You asked." Nobody moved for a second. Then Ethan grabbed my sleeve and pulled. We turned toward the exit door and started walking fast. We didn't run, and that wasn't bravery. It was fear. None of us wanted to make a mistake that felt like breaking a rule. When we hit the service door and pushed back into the normal hallway, the lights were on and the vending machines were humming. It should have felt normal, but it didn't. Wet footprints had appeared on the carpet outside the service door. Bare footprints. These were not normal. The toes were much too long. The stride between them was too long for a person walking at a normal pace. The prints went straight toward the stairwell door, which was about 20 feet away. Then they did something I still don't know how to explain. They continued up the wall beside the stairwell door. The wet marks went vertical, climbing from the carpet up the painted wall. The last print was near the ceiling, right at the corner where the wall met the ceiling tile. Then they stopped. Ethan stood staring with his phone light pointed at them, and his mouth was wide open. One of the other guys whispered, "I can't," and he started to back away. We went down the stairs. We didn't talk until we got back to our floor. When we got back into my room, everybody went quiet. They could tell by our faces that we were not joking. Ethan held up his phone and said he had an incoming call while we were in the service hallway. It was time-stamped, and there was no number. The screen showed a blank where a number should have been. Nicole even looked pale, and I realized she was not enjoying this. We tried to calm ourselves down by blaming each other, which is what people do. We said someone must have been messing with us. Someone must have planted something. Someone must have poured some water. Someone must have found a way to do that voice. But that doesn't make complete sense. We couldn't figure out how wet, bare footprints could appear and go up a wall. We couldn't figure out where the water smell in the service hallway came from. We could not figure out the handprints. People left after that. Nobody wanted to keep drinking or keep playing anything. Later that night, after the room was quiet and Ethan was sleeping, I heard footsteps above us. We were on the second floor. The footsteps were slow, not stomping. They moved back and forth, covering the same stretch over and over. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting my breath because I didn't want to move. At some point, I felt something touch my wrist. It was cold, damp. I sat up so fast that I nearly fell off the bed. But there was nothing there. The next morning, I went to the library. I just didn't know what else to do. I ended up in a section that had old campus planning documents and local history junk. I didn't even know our library had that until I started wandering. I had a binder that had maps and project summaries from campus expansion. I flipped through it until I saw a map that showed the area where the dorm had been built. It had a note on it, small and bland, that made my stomach drop. Former settlement site. Cleared. Relocated. There were no details or notes about what relocated meant. I do not know who lived here before us, but I do know that after reading that, I could smell that mud smell again, the one from the service hallway, so I left the library. I put in a transfer to get out of that dorm at the end of the year. As far as I know, plenty of people have stayed there and never had a problem. And most folks probably think that legend is funny and not real. But I believe it. The Echo of a Man, from Somnians. I lost my left hand when I was a kid. I say lost because it's the easiest way to put it, without having to explain the whole story every time. It was an accident, and it was stupid, and it was fast, and it changed everything forever. I'm fine now. I've been doing two-handed jobs with one hand for most of my life, so I'm not here for sympathy. But it matters to this story because it affects what I notice and what I don't. And yes, it does take a while to write something like this up. I work at Aldi. I've worked there long enough that most things feel automatic for me. I know where everything is without thinking and what noises are normal, like when the freezer is about to throw a fit, or the way the floor squeaks when you walk on it after it's been mopped. I also know how people act when they come in and want to steal something. I know how people act when they come in because they're lonely or want somewhere warm. This happened 3 years ago. I still think about it sometimes when I'm closing and the store gets that empty feeling. It was late enough that the parking lot was mostly empty and the register area felt too bright compared to the rest of the store. It was one of those super slow nights where it seems like the clock is being lazy. A couple of people had come through and grabbing milk or beer, but that was it. If you've ever worked retail, you know what I mean when I say a slow day. It's not peaceful per se, it's kind of tense in a low-grade way, because you're just waiting for something to happen or half hoping nothing does. Could be a rush 1 minute or nothing. Around that time, a man came in. He didn't come in like a normal customer. He appeared older, maybe late 50s or early 60s, hard to tell. His clothes looked like they'd been slept in, all dirty and worn down. His jacket was too big and hung off of him like it belonged to a much bigger person. His hair was long and thin. He looked relieved to come inside after a long time outside. We get people like that sometimes. I'm not saying that to be cruel, it's just true. A lot of stores have to deal with it. The managers usually want us to discourage loitering. They don't want the store turning into a hangout spot. They don't want customers feeling uncomfortable. There are policies, but the reality is you have to use judgment. If someone comes in and it looks like they might buy something, you give them a little time. If they come in and just wander around or sit down or start to act weird, you have to decide when to step in. This guy came in and moved in a straight line. He walked through the entrance. He didn't look at the seasonal junk or the carts. He headed down the first aisle like he already knew where he wanted to go. He did not glance at the checkout lanes. He did not make eye contact with me. He didn't look around the store either. He walked like he was following instructions, like a pre-planned route. I watched him for a second because he stood out. I told myself it was nothing. People come in with their heads down all the time, so I waited. A few minutes went by, then a few more. The store was empty at the time besides me, one stalker somewhere in the back half, and our manager doing something in the office. It was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigeration units and the faint music overhead. Aldi music always feels like it's being played for nobody. I kept expecting the man to come up and check out with something small. That's usually the way it goes. They grab a soda, something cheap, a snack or a loaf of bread. But this man never came to the checkout. After a while, I started thinking about the other possibility. Sometimes people come in and they steal. Sometimes they come in and just wander because it's warm and bright, and they can pretend for 10 minutes that they're a regular person doing regular shopping. I waited longer than I usually would, because I didn't want to make a big deal if he was actually buying something. I also didn't want to be that employee who jumps on someone just because they look homeless. I've seen some coworkers I will not name do that, and it always feels gross. Most of the time it escalates for no reason. But he had been in there long enough that it was feeling odd. The store wasn't big. You can't wander around in an Aldi for 20 minutes without looping around. So I got up from the register and walked out from behind the lane. I went down the aisle he had gone down. I scanned the lanes between shelves as I walked, but I didn't see him. I went farther back, toward the middle. I checked by the coolers. I checked the aisle where the bread was, and the aisle with the canned stuff. I walked past end caps and looked down each row, but the man wasn't there. I felt a little stupid. I thought maybe he had come up while I was looking away, deciding not to buy anything, and left. People do that all the time. I walked back toward the front. The entrance door didn't make its usual sound, and I didn't hear it open. I didn't hear anyone around. The store still felt empty, like it was before he ever came. I got back behind the register and told myself he was just gone. I went back to staring at the lane, waiting for the next customer, thinking about what I still needed to do before close. A couple minutes passed, but then I saw him again. He came in the same way as before. Through the front doors, same speed, straight in a line down the first aisle. He didn't look at me and did not hesitate. I sat up a little straighter, because my brain took a second to catch up. My first thought was, did he leave and come back in without me noticing? That is possible. I felt embarrassed a bit, thinking I might have missed him leaving in the first place. The door is very visible from the register, but you get distracted sometimes. You look down, you look at your screen, you zone out. Still, the way he entered again this time bothered me. I mean, people don't usually enter twice in a row with the same exact routine, unless they're doing something, or maybe they forgot something. I watched him go down the aisle again. I told myself this time I would keep a better eye out. I still didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I'm not going to call my manager over a guy walking back in. He disappeared into the aisles again, and once more he never came to the checkout. This time I didn't wait as long. I gave it a few minutes, then I stepped out. I didn't feel angry, I just felt, I don't know, strange, uneasy. I didn't like the way he was going in the store, not making a sound, being hidden. The idea I was in here with someone else that I couldn't locate was kind of uncomfortable. I walked down the same aisle he had gone down. I got to the point where the aisle opens up into the cross aisle, and I looked left and right. I then saw him ahead of me, near the middle of an aisle. It was a quick glimpse, but it was him. Same jacket, same hair, and the same posture. He moved past the end of the aisle and out of my sight. I decided to follow. I wasn't chasing him, I was walking at a normal pace. I wanted to see where he was going, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't doing something in the back of the store that he shouldn't have been. I turned into the aisle right after he passed through. He was gone. That aisle had no customers, and it was just a straight sight line. The shelves were full height, but you can still see down it. But there was no one at the far end. He hadn't gone out the other side because I would have seen him cross the opening. I stopped and stood there, looking. This wasn't making sense. I checked the next aisle, then the one after that. I walked to the end of the aisle and looked into the cross aisle. No man, no movement, no sound. At this point, I could feel my face getting hot. I felt stupid again, but this was a different kind of stupid. It was the feeling you get when something simple should have an explanation, and you can't find one. I went back to the front and sat down behind the register. I didn't tell anyone yet. I tried to talk myself down. I must have missed him slipping into another aisle, or he doubled back. He left without me noticing, somehow, again. Maybe he was leaving through the back, even though that part wasn't open to the customers, but anxious brains invent possibilities. The store stayed empty. No customers came in for a while. The stalker was still doing his thing in the back, and I could hear boxes shifting sometimes. Besides that, it was quiet again. About an hour later, the same man came in a third time, and I kid you not, he had the exact same look, movement, direction, head down, everything. It was less like the same man coming in a third time, and more like a video being played on repeat. No alteration, no difference in the way he walked in. I was flabbergasted. This time I felt my heart quicken. I put my hand on the counter and gripped it, needing to ground myself. I watched him go, and it didn't feel real. I waited, not moving from my spot, and I sat there for several minutes. But the man never came to the checkout. Then I decided to stand up on the counter. I was desperate to know what this man was doing, how he kept getting away. He had not come back out yet. I knew that for a fact. I'd been keeping a close eye on the entrance. When I stood on that counter and got on my tiptoes, I could see over every aisle. The man was not in the store. Immediately I went to the manager and I called out for him. When he didn't answer my call, I called out to the stalker. He was the one to come up first. For a moment he looked annoyed. Not at me exactly, but at the idea of extra drama late at night when we were nearly closed. Then he saw my face and his reaction became different. I was not calm at this time. I was trying to be calm, but something else was coming through, I'm sure of it. Without using the word ghost or glitch or anything, I began to explain to him what was going on. The manager showed up mid-explanation, so I started over. I said a guy who looked homeless kept coming in, walking down the same aisle, walking the same way, but never coming out. And it kept happening again and again and again. The manager told me to go take a smoke break. He said he would handle the register and the stalker would keep an eye out. He felt empathetic, not making fun of me, not annoyed, and that really helped me. He could tell I was rattled. I took him up on the offer. I went outside for a 15-minute smoke break. I needed the air. I know it's an oxymoron, smoking and getting air. Anyway, I stood by the side of the building where employees usually go. The parking lot was mostly empty. The rain had slowed down, but everything was wet, and the lights made the asphalt shiny. I was trying to get my breathing back to normal, trying to settle back on the idea that I was just overreacting. I kept replaying it in my head, thinking about the aisle where he vanished. How I would lose sight of him and never hear anything. No entrance, no exit, no little chime, no footsteps. This guy was either a ghost or a ninja. About 10 minutes into my break, the stalker came running outside. He looked startled. He was usually a laid-back guy, older than me. Not fearless, but not really caring about what happens. Beyond that, he's seen a lot in retail over the years. He looked me square in the eyes and said, "I saw him too. 4 times. And he never left." I stared at him, my brain wanting to reject what he just said. Eventually I replied, "Wait, what?" "The guy you described. He came in, I never saw him leave, and then he just kept coming in 3 more times." He explained how after I walked away for the break, he took over watching the store and the manager was at the register, so there were 2 sets of eyes on the store. We went back inside together. The manager was still at the register. The manager's face looked tight, or maybe tense is the better word. He asked if either of us had seen the man. We shook our heads, meaning if he was still in here, and I doubted he was, we hadn't seen him. The 3 of us searched the entire store, every aisle. We checked the back area that customers aren't supposed to go into. We checked the bathrooms, behind pallets and displays, and those weird little corners where someone could hide if they wanted to be a problem. And yet, after a full deep dive, there was no man. We finished closing like normal. There was nothing else we could do. The manager locked the doors, and we did our routine. And yet I kept expecting the man to appear again. Thankfully, he didn't. When we left, the parking lot was still empty. Now, after all this, I don't really have a theory that makes me feel content. If he was real, a person, a human, I mean, maybe we all missed something obvious. Or maybe it was something not so human that played a trick on 3 tired employees in a bright, empty store. Never speak to them. From No Name. I worked for a certain tribal school for 6 years as a groundskeeper. It's on the reservation I grew up in. If you know anything about this part of the country, down in the Southwest, you know the land out here holds things that don't like to be talked about. My job is to keep the grounds clean and maintain the fields, fix what needs fixed up, make sure the place is clean and safe for the kids. Most of my work happens after the school day ends. The kids clear out around 3:30, the teachers trickle out by 4:30 or 5, then it's just me until I finish up. Usually takes me till around 7, but that depends heavily on the season. My favorite part of the job is the quiet. Again, I grew up here, so the desert and the tree line at the edge of the property don't bother me. Well, they didn't used to. What I'm about to tell you happened not too long ago. I've thought about sharing it since then, but I kept talking myself out of it. I didn't really feel like putting it into words. My grandmother says that talking about these things gives them power, gives them a way to find you again, and that scares the bejesus out of me. But I'll be moving soon, and I think people need to be warned. You shouldn't make the same mistake that I did. It was a Thursday when I checked the athletic equipment to make sure the basketball courts are clear of debris before the weekend. The courts are at the far east end of the school property, right where the maintained grass gives way to brush and woods. It's maybe 200 yards from the main building to the courts, and another 50 yards from the courts to the tree line. That evening, there was a mist rolling in from the hills. It happens when the temperature drops fast after a warm day. The sun was getting low, and that time of day is usually beautiful. But that night, the mist made everything feel creepy. I remember it being very, very quiet. Not even wind that night. It was so quiet, I heard nothing but my ears ringing. I was picking up trash near the bleachers when I saw it. I thought it was a kid. There was a small shape stepping out from the tree line, about 30 yards into the mist. A silhouette, really. I couldn't make out much more detail than that. Just this outline of what looked to be a child. Small, probably the size of a 7 or 8-year-old kid. I was thinking that one of the students had stayed behind and wandered off. I've had kids hide in the bathroom after school hours. Some have snuck off and fallen asleep, waking up well after the day had ended. They're often confused when everyone's gone. So I didn't panic. I set down my trash bag and started walking toward the courts. I called out to it. "Hey, what are you doing out there?" The silhouette reacted to my words, stopping instantly. I kept going. "School's over, buddy. You need to come back. I can call someone to pick you up." And then it laughed. I could never describe that sound in a way that makes you truly understand it, but I can say it was like a kid's laugh, a bit high-pitched and light, but it bounced around like it was coming from everywhere, from the woods, from behind me, from inside my own head. And underneath that laugh was something else, like a second, lower sound that reminded me of breathing or growling. Every hair on my body stood up. I stopped walking, I even stopped breathing for a moment, because at that second, I remembered every story my grandmother ever told me, every warning from my elders, all the pieces of folklore I'd brushed off as superstition when I was younger, when I thought I knew better than everyone else. You don't speak to them. You do not acknowledge them. You don't give them your attention, because your attention is an invitation. And I had just called out to it, twice. The silhouette stood there for another few seconds. I couldn't see its face, couldn't see anything but that small dark shape against the gray mist. Then, slowly, it turned and walked back into the woods. I stood frozen until it disappeared completely into the trees. When I could finally move again, I walked back to the main building as quickly as I could. I had about an hour left on my shift. I spent it inside the building, finding busy work in the hallways and the gym. I mopped floors that didn't need any more mopping, and I checked locks that were already locked. Anything I could do to stay inside, stay in the light, stay away from the windows that faced the tree line. The whole time I felt watched. You can call it paranoia, but it felt more like knowing, like I knew something was coming or waiting. By the time 7 p.m. came around, the sun was almost completely down. The parking lot had one working light, and it barely covered a quarter of the gravel lot. My stupid self had parked the truck near the far end. I always leave the closer spots for teachers and visitors to be nice, but that day I regretted it. I walked to my truck with my keys in hand. I didn't dare look at the tree line. I kept my eyes straight ahead. I got to my truck door, unlocked it, and climbed in. Then I pulled the door shut behind me. And the second I did that, something landed on the roof of my truck. The entire vehicle rocked. The impact was so hard I thought the roof might cave in. I yelled, and I slammed my hand down on the lock button so hard I thought I broke it. Then the other sounds started. Scraping, clawing sounds, like something with long, hard nails trying to dig through the metal above my head. I could hear it moving and shifting its weight, dragging something sharp across the roof in long strokes. It wasn't frantic. It was steady, just working its way through. I couldn't even move. I sat there with my hands locked on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, too scared to even turn my head. I thought about just starting the truck and flooring it, but I couldn't even move my hands towards the ignition. Then I thought about my phone. Could I call someone? What could they even do? And wouldn't that require further acknowledgement? Suddenly, the scraping stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just silence and my own breathing. Then I heard it move to the front of the truck. The hood dipped slightly under its weight. It was right there, right on the other side of the windshield, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. Just a shape, a mass. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't help it. I didn't want to see it. I was just too scared. I was shaking so hard that now I was shaking the truck. Or maybe it was still the thing moving. I couldn't tell. Suddenly, it jumped. I heard it leave the hood with a sound like a coiled spring releasing. My eyes flew open just in time to see something land in the gravel about 20 feet ahead of my truck. It was lit for a moment by the distant parking lot light. Primarily what I saw were legs. Legs that were extremely long and thin, unrealistically so, bent backward, like an exaggerated version of dogs' legs. They were much too thin and bony looking to even be able to walk. And yet it moved, bounding and leaping and covering ground faster than anything I'd seen move at that size. It was gone into the darkness in less than 2 seconds. I sat in that truck for about 20 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. I drove home, going 20 over, and I kept every light in the cab on. When I got home, I didn't get out of the truck until my brother came outside to see why I was just sitting in the driveway. I told him I was okay, but I didn't tell him what happened, not until after I went to see my grandmother the following day. I asked her to pray with me, and she knew without having to ask. I still work at that school. It's not a job I can afford to quit, but I don't stay past sundown anymore, and I never stare towards the tree line for too long. Some things don't need your attention, and some things, once you give it to them, don't forget. What the heck was this? From Boss M.O. I'm a firefighter. Last August, in the middle of a bad fire year, we'd just come back from 9 straight days on a Type 2 assignment. The other 3 guys on my crew were out cold by 9 p.m., sprawled in the bunk room at our suppression crew station in Northern California. I've never been able to sleep right after a deployment. Too much adrenaline and too many days of irregular hours. So I was sitting in the kitchen with the lights off, scrolling through my phone and drinking water. My way of winding down. The 2-bay garage was open to the night, because it always was in the summer. The building doesn't have AC, and the bays turn into ovens otherwise. Around 11:30, I heard something from the garage. It sounded like a whisper. Specifically, it sounded like someone going, "Psst," like someone was trying to get my attention. I figured one of the guys had woke up and actually needed my attention on the down low, so I walked through the doorway into the first bay. Both engines were sitting there, gear hung on the racks, everything in their place. The garage door was open to the night, and I could see the gravel apron and the tree line beyond. Psst. It came from outside, just around the corner of the building, past where the floodlight reaches. I stepped out onto the apron. The air was still smoky from the fires to the north. I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I said, not too loud. But to be honest, I'm not sure why I was keeping my voice down out here. There was nothing at first, until, "Psst, over here." Now, it sounded like words, and yet it did not sound like speech. Imagine how a lyrebird mimics noises. It can sound like an almost perfect imitation, but you can tell that it doesn't come from the actual source. That's the best I can do to describe it. It was coming from the far corner of the building where the brush starts. I walked toward it, and everything, I noticed, was dead silent. I was about 15 feet from the corner when something moved in the brush ahead. Something big, big enough that the bushes parted and swayed like something heavy had just passed through. I stopped walking. I could hear it settling in there, branches creaking, and then it went still. "Psst, over here." The sound came from inside the brush. about 10 feet from me, low to the ground, but not low enough. Whatever was making that sound, it was right there, hidden, waiting, and wanting me to come closer. Never in my life has every hair on my body stood up all at once, but it did then. And every cell that made me up was screaming at me not to run, but to go back inside, calmly as I could. So I started to back up, one step at a time, never turning around, until I hit the gravel apron and the floodlight was on me again. Then I went inside and pulled down the garage doors, and I sat in the kitchen until sunrise. Later on, I told the guys about this, but they joked about it and poked fun at me for getting scared of a mountain lion or a bear. Doesn't matter. I don't sit in the kitchen with the garage doors open at night anymore. A series of stories from Rosie's Choices. I got myself into babysitting and got really popular among the neighborhoods. All the popular parks, clubs, and local stores. I usually get evening calls for parents who need a night out, but occasionally I get called during the days. Here are some stories I've collected. I babysat a little one that I'll call Alex. Alex was a toddler and didn't know how to speak clearly yet. It was during the day and they woke up from their afternoon slumbers. We decided to go to the park. Fortunately for us, there were other children Alex's age at the park. We took some toys and the children were having fun. This park was a cute little place, just down the street from the house. I like to use this park whenever I babysit in the area. This park is divided by a standard metal fence, like the ones you see in the baseball batting cages. On the other side of that was a house. The first few times we went there, I didn't think much of the house. Maybe that I'd hate all the park noise sometimes, if I'd lived there. The more I sat across from that house, the more it creeped me out though. I didn't say anything to anyone about that. If I talked to a parent, it's just playground banter. If it's with kids, it's sandbox banter. There was a small window on the top floor of the house. The lights were always off there, or at least very dimly lit. You could almost see the dark wallpaper with a few picture frames on the walls. On that day, Alex was happily throwing a ball against the fence. I was encouraging them to throw the ball higher. They were trying, then suddenly stopped. Slowly, they looked up at the window and pointed, then began to cry. I held them and consoled them, trying to figure out what happened. The window that they pointed at, there was nothing there. That room was dark. The crying started to worsen, so I carried them to the bench to go somewhere else, to get away from the house. Other parents also saw the sudden stop and pointing. They came over and told me that that house always creeped them out too. But admittedly, they didn't want to sound crazy, so they hadn't said anything until now. One other nanny came with us to a local children's store to look at some toys and books. She told me to be careful. Kids are more vulnerable to certain things. We never know how, if, or when they'll come into contact with unexplainable things. I worked at a private residence for the first time. I was there for a week to cover their sitter's vacation. They were coming back from a family trip and asked me to come in the day before to collect the keys and get a tour. I met the house manager. She showed me the routine, the nursery, and the child's bedroom. This particular family was very detailed and had a routine. I felt very unsettled for some reason, but I blamed it on nerves. But even that was odd for me because I've babysat for ages, and I usually didn't get nervous like this. We stood by the doorway of the nursery. She asked me, "How are you feeling so far? Are you getting it?" I replied, "Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward. I think I've got it. Guess I'm just a little nervous at a new house." "No, it's definitely the house. This particular part of the house is worse. You'll see," she replied. "Oh, can't wait," I laughed. Then she stopped me. "To put it bluntly, there's like this old man spirit here. He's grumpy, but he loves kids, never harms kids. But the adults he likes to bother. He might play some tricks on you." She looked at me intently. I looked back, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. But she was serious. I laughed anyway. I haven't noticed anything yet. I guess he's filling me out so far, huh? We both smirked a little, and I said my goodbyes before leaving. When my first shift started, I did what was on the agenda: to set up the nursery for maximum exploration. It was such a beautiful morning. As I was pulling up the blinds, a toy on the opposite side of the room fell on the floor from a shelf. I looked around and even poked my head outside the door. No one there. I noticed, too, that the lights often flickered, which was odd considering it was a newer house. When I asked the housekeeper and the chef, they mentioned things like that often happened in that particular part of the house. They said I should be thankful it's only a week-long contract. Experiencing toy dropping, things going missing, and lights flickering was enough for a lifetime. A friend of mine needed to leave for a while for a personal emergency, and I stayed over to take care of their kids in their house for a bit. The oldest took care of themselves, and the youngest was 3 and full of energy. The grandparents came over for the weekends. They gave me the weekend to settle in, since this was very last minute, and the grandparents didn't have the energy to do it for that long. They went out for the day, and they said they may come back late. I've known this 3-year-old since he was in the mommy's tummy. I've hit the auntie status. He was so excited that I would be staying with him. This was during the wintertime. It got dark before 6 p.m. I was listening to a podcast, settling into my bedroom. I had the door open, and in the corner of my room I saw a shadow running into the closet. I snuck in and said, "Boo!" but there was no one in there. I walked out of the room and walked around the house. There wasn't anyone home. I haven't told my friends to this day, and I haven't taken any babysitting gigs for them at their house. When the walls of your work speak. From Anonymous. When it comes to Wendigos, skinwalkers, and paranormal activity, I think they attach themselves to those who are more sensitive to that stuff. But I haven't had too many experiences with them. I work for a company in an office building downtown in a busy city. We have a small team of workers, so we get along pretty well. With how our office is set up, I ended up in an office with a walk-in storage closet, while most of the others had smaller closets. I let a few people use my closet as I didn't need all that space. I also have a open door policy as long as I'm not in a meeting, and I lock up all the important files. As a note, these names have been changed for anonymity. Kyle is the type of person who could easily make people laugh. A few years ago, he started to pull little pranks, and we pay it back to him. Nothing that would hurt someone, though. Even our boss gets into it. Kyle is one of the few who keeps some of his work items in my closet. During winters, when it gets dark early, I only turn on yellow light lamps, because office lights tend to give me a headache. One night while we were getting ready to leave, I had my back against the door, while some of my colleagues were putting stuff away in my closet. I heard this little giggle that sounded like Kyle. I turned around, saying, "Kyle, what are you up to in there? You better not be messing up my closet." I didn't hear anything, so I went in the closet and no one was there. I chalked it up to Kyle possibly talking nearby my office somewhere. As I was closing my closet, in the corner of my eye, I saw this shadow run out of my office. This shadow was too clear to be mistaken for my eyes playing tricks. I looked out of my office and there was only Sarah, who was at the end of the hallway locking up her office. She saw me as she began to walk down. She asked, "Are you okay?" Did you see Kyle? I think he's playing with me," I said with a laugh. "Oh, he left a little early today." "Why, what did he do?" She asked with a smile, like she suspected another prank story. "Really? I don't want to sound crazy, but what? What happened?" She sounded concerned now. "I heard a giggle in my closet. It sounded like him. Then this shadow ran out. That's why I poked my head out of my office just now. I thought I'd see him," I said. She looked at me like she didn't really believe me, then said, "Probably lights playing tricks on you, or he's gotten you on edge. But no, he's not here right now." She waited for me to grab my bags and we left together. A few weeks later, I went to our community workstation with an armful of stuff and forgot my ID badge, which works as a card key to enter certain areas of the office. I asked Kyle, who was walking past my office at the moment, if he could grab my badge from my desk for me. He came out and told me that it wasn't there. At first, I thought he was playing around and laughed. "Kyle, are you being serious?" He replied, "Yeah, there's no badge on your desk. All seriousness." I went back and it really wasn't on my desk. I remember taking it off to readjust my clothes and leaving it on my desk. I checked my bags, the floor, my drawer, the closet, my jacket pockets, and retraced my steps where I'd been in my office. I know it had to be in my office somewhere. I had just used it before this. I couldn't find it all morning, so I let management know it had gotten lost. Everyone asked Kyle if he took it, and he said he really hadn't touched it, and that he wouldn't go as far as to ruin someone else's work, which is true. He hasn't done anything that could jeopardize people's work. For the rest of the day, I'd been locking my office door whenever I left. A few of us went out for lunch, and when I went back to my desk, it was sitting exactly where I'd left it when I first took it off. I asked the office manager, Candace, if she or our boss dropped it off while we were out. She said that no one had been in my office since we left. At least, not to her knowledge. But she was in the bullpen since we left, and no one went in. Candace and our boss would be the only ones who would have the key to my office. I told Sarah and Kyle about where I found it. They seemed genuinely as dumbfounded as I was, because we were looking for it together. About a week after that, I noticed how things shifted around my office. Except it's not just my office. Others were experiencing it as well. I've been in this company and this office long enough to know all the normal sounds that it makes. It started with a pile of folders behind me. It slid as if something bumped into it when nothing had. Things would fall off the shelves in my closet when they never had before. A coworker I share a wall with, it once sounded like he threw something or punched the wall we shared. When I went to check in on him, his shelf had fallen, and a few things fell that made those sounds out of the blue. Sarah and Kyle also mentioned how some things are always slightly off. Kyle accused us jokingly that we moved his stapler under his desk as a joke, when we hadn't. Sarah mentioned she would find her lunch bag under her desk all the time, when she normally places it on the counter behind her. We thought it was just one-off experiences, or that we were pulling jokes on each other. But now we are experiencing things together still, like sometimes we hear tapping on our walls, as if someone is knocking on our door, or someone is moving stuff around us. We often get college interns or high school students as volunteers. It's not weird to get assigned interns every college semester. On my intern Fiona's first day, she was brought to my office around 9 a.m. After we got acquainted, I gave her a desk in my office, and we went on a tour. I noticed she was quiet, maybe shy in nature. I didn't think too much of it when she didn't say much, as I'm also an introvert. I can be a person of few words sometimes. I assigned her to read over our manual. I noticed she kept her jacket and her backpack on the whole time. I told her she was welcome to get comfortable. She could hang her jacket in my closet. It's relatively safe, I told her. She could use a locking drawer as her locker too, and she said she was fine. A while later, she told me that she was done with our manual. I gave her easy first day tasks, mostly to get her familiar with the office layout. One of those tasks was to take some documents to the boss's office, which was at the other end of the office. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I didn't see her. I called my boss and asked if she got there all right to drop off the documents. He said that he got them about 10 minutes ago. I texted and called her, but there wasn't a response. I decided to take a walk around the office, in case she'd gotten herself lost. I was talking to one of my colleagues when I noticed Fiona turning into the hallway to the washroom and emergency staircase. I excused myself and headed to that hallway. When I got closer, I called her name. "Fiona!" I didn't get a response. I opened the emergency exit door. I didn't hear anyone on the staircase, but I still called out again. "Fiona!" Still no response. I was heading back to the hall to check the washroom when I saw her coming out of the washroom. "Hey, Fiona!" She didn't even flinch or turn. She just turned toward the corner away from my office. When I also turned the corner, she wasn't there anymore. There wasn't anywhere she could go from there other than other offices. If she wanted to leave, she'd need to wait for the elevators. Kyle, who was standing in front of his office, asked what I was doing. "Have you seen Fiona, my intern? She's wearing her jacket and her bag still," I asked. "Yeah, I saw her turn the corner and I haven't seen her since," he said jokingly. "Did you make her feel so miserable that she just left?" "Ha ha, Kyle," I said while going back to my office. I approached Candace. "Did you see Fiona, my intern?" "I saw her going into the kitchen. I followed her in there to show her how the kitchen works. But when I went in, she wasn't there. and I swear I saw her going in, but not coming out. She looked at me, puzzled. There's only one way in and out of that kitchen. Candace is really strict about how organized and clean our work kitchen is. If anyone even breathes towards the kitchen, Candace would know about it. So I know she was as lost as I was about it. I put a work blast out, asking to direct my intern towards me when they saw her. A few minutes later, Candace came in, saying that her school had contacted us. She was out of her intern program. The receptionist said she signed out without saying anything or making eye contact. Sarah also mentioned how she would see her one second and not the next when we were talking about how strange it was. Our office is a big rectangle with a small hallway with the washroom and emergency exit. A person would have to deliberately sneak around to be hidden like that. I understand that all these could have logical reasoning or seem fake, but these are just some weird experiences among many, or you just have to be there to experience it. I'm only sharing because I ran out of logical explanations. My DoorDash Creep, from Whale Shell, 19X. I started doing DoorDash about 2 years ago to make some extra money on top of my usual job. I would usually dash in the evenings after work, about 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on how I feel. I know my area pretty well at this point, which restaurants are fast and which ones will have you waiting 20 minutes for a sealed bag. And I know which neighborhoods tip well. I'm not saying this to brag about it, but to tell you that when something feels off in my routine, I notice it pretty quick. I had just started picking up more shifts leading into the holidays. I got this order around 8:30 p.m. for a Thai place I pick up from regularly. Good restaurant, usually quick. The order itself was normal, about $40 worth of food. The delivery address was in a neighborhood I'd been to a handful of times, some older apartments. Not sketchy though, just quiet. When I pulled up, the building didn't have much great lighting out front. The instructions said to come to the 3rd floor and hand it to them directly. I don't love hand-it-to-me orders at night, but it's part of the job. I grabbed the bag and went up. The hallway on the 3rd floor was dim. None of the lights were broken or missing. They were just all super dim, and the place smelled like old carpet. I got to the door and began to knock. There was no response at all for about 30 seconds. So I knocked again. I could hear movement inside now, like someone shuffling, but still no one came to the door. I was about to just leave it and take a photo when the door opened maybe 4 inches. They didn't have a chain, I noticed. They just cracked it open barely enough to see a sliver of face. It was a man, seemed to be in his mid-40s. He didn't say a word. He stared at me through that little crack. "Hey, I've got your DoorDash order," I said, holding the bag back up. He didn't reach for it, but he did keep staring. At me, not the bag. After what felt like ages, but was probably 5 seconds, he opened the door a little wider and took the bag without a word. He didn't close the door right away either. I said, "Have a good night," and I turned around and began to walk back down the hallway. But even then, I could still feel that he was standing there. I didn't want to look back. I got in my car and left. I rated the delivery as weird in my head and moved on. That's the thing about this job. You meet all kinds of people, and most of the awkward ones are just socially off. It doesn't always mean more than that. About a week later, I was doing a delivery in a completely different part of town. I had just dropped off an order at a house and was walking back to my car when I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with its headlights off. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat though. I could tell. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except that when I pulled away, the sedan pulled out behind me. Coincidence, I hoped. It followed me though for about 6 turns before I told myself I was being paranoid again, and it turned off. But this happened again about 3 days later. It was a different neighborhood, the same dark sedan though. I was picking up from a burger place, and when I came out with the order, I saw it parked in the lot. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but someone was in there. I did my delivery, and even took a weird route home, turning randomly through side streets. I didn't see the car again that night, but something in my gut wouldn't let me relax. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw that sedan at least 5 more times, always during my dashes, always parked somewhere nearby, but never directly behind me for long. It was like whoever it was knew my general area, but not my exact route. So I started changing things up, like when and where I dashed. I'd skip nights or drive to a zone 20 minutes away. For a few days, I didn't see it and thought maybe I'd been overthinking it. But then I came home one night after a shift, and my apartment door was unlocked. But I know I locked it before I left. I always lock it. I live alone, and locking the door is just automatic to me. I stood in the doorway for a minute and listened. Nothing. I walked through every room slowly, checking the closets, checking behind the shower curtain, but there was no one there. However, things were slightly off. A drawer in my kitchen was open about an inch. One of my couch cushions was shifted too, and my bedroom window, which I never opened, was now unlocked. Sure, none of it was dramatic enough to call the police over. Nothing was missing or broken, but I knew someone had been in my apartment. I decided to install a cheap camera inside my apartment the next day. I pointed it at the front door. I also began writing down every time I saw the sedan, the date, the time, the location, and anything else I could note. I told my friend Maddie about everything. He said I should go to the police anyway, but still I felt like I'd be wasting their time, like I didn't have enough evidence. At this point, it was just a car I kept seeing, and an unlocked door one time. They would think I was losing it. 2 days after the camera went up, I checked the footage after a shift. There it was. About 2 hours into my dash, someone opened my front door, walked in, and stood in my living room for about a minute, before walking back out. The camera quality wasn't that great, but it was clearly a man, average build, wearing a hoodie and a ball cap. He didn't take anything. He seemed to just stand there and look around for a moment. It was like he was checking if I was home, and he looked comfortable doing it. I went to the police that night. I showed them the footage, my notes, and everything, and they took my report. They told me they'd look into it, and to call if anything escalated. They also told me to consider changing my locks, which I did the next morning. But honestly, their response did not make me feel much safer. A report is just paper. I kept door dashing, but truthfully, I was on edge every single night. I would check my mirrors all the time. I would sit in my car for a few minutes before going inside, watching the street. The sedan showed up twice more over the next week. Once near a Chick-fil-A I pick up from a lot, and once parked on my street. On my street. That made me feel very sick. I called the police again about the car being on my street. They sent someone to patrol the area, and by the time they got there, the car was long gone. I followed up on the report twice, but nothing came of it. There were no leads or plates they could run, nothing they could do. I had to break my lease to move to a different apartment across town the following month. I didn't tell anyone the new address except Maddie and my family. I changed my dashing zones completely, and I stopped dashing at night for a long time, only doing lunch shifts on weekends. It felt like I was starting over, and I hated that. I was angry about it. It's been about 5 months now, and I have yet to see the sedan again. I haven't had any signs of someone being in my apartment either. I did eventually go back to evening dashes, just in different areas. I don't know who this guy was, or what his problem with me was, but I'm glad it's over, for now. The most unsettling man I've ever met. From Piece of Reese. I'm going to keep this vague on purpose. I won't be naming the facility, the state, or the man. People I work with know this story, and they'll know it's me writing this. But I'm not putting details out there that could come back on my career. I've been in corrections for going on 11 years, county level, and after that much time you see a lot, and you've heard a lot. Most of it you forget because you have to, but this one I can't forget, even though I've tried. We process a high volume of people. DUIs, domestics, warrants, the usual rotation. You learn real fast not to take anything personally in here. These guys will say the worst things imaginable to you because they're angry and drunk and sometimes scared. But it rolls off. That's the job. But every now and then you get someone who unsettles you in a way that has nothing to do with what they did on the outside. It's something about how they carry themselves on the inside. He came in on a Tuesday night. I was working intake. The charge was aggravated assault, which we get plenty of, so nothing about the booking stood out on paper. Arresting officers brought him in, and he seemed cooperative. He was polite even. That's not unusual either. Plenty of people are calm during booking because the adrenaline is gone and reality is setting in. But this wasn't the same as that. He wasn't calm like someone defeated. He was cozy, even. Like he'd been there before, except he hadn't. He didn't have any priors. I ran him myself to check. During processing, he made small talk. He asked me how long I'd been doing this, and if I liked it. Normal enough questions, but he asked them more like my doctor asking if it hurts. As if he already had some idea and wanted to see if I'd confirm it. I gave him short answers and moved him along. He looked me right in the eyes the entire time. There was no ounce of anger or hatred or anything. He just locked in, like he was trying to read me. A little weird, but fine. When I walked him to his holding cell, he said to me, "You're gonna have a rough time tonight. Not because of me. Someone on B block is going to give you problems around 2:15. A medical issue. You should check on him before that." He said it so casually, like telling me the weather's gonna get bad or that there's traffic on the highway. I said something like, "All right, thanks for the heads up." I was being sarcastic. At about 2:10, an inmate on B block had a seizure. He'd never had a seizure before in his life. Nothing in his medical history. I wasn't even on B block. I heard it on the radio. I stood there for a second and felt every hair on my arms stand up. Then I told myself it had to be a coincidence. People have medical emergencies in here all the time. There's no way a man in a holding cell on the other end of the facility would know about this. I put it out of my mind, or I tried to. He was with us for a few days before his hearing. In that time, I interacted with him maybe 4 or 5 more times. Beyond the weirdness, he was a model detainee. No issues with other inmates or with staff. He followed every instruction immediately, but he talked. Not excessively and not loud, he'd just say things that made you stop for half a second too long. I was doing a routine check and he was sitting on his bunk, hands in his lap, totally relaxed. He said then, "How's the daughter doing with the new school?" I don't wear a ring, I don't have photos on me, I have never once discussed my personal life with any inmate ever. I have a daughter, and at the time she had transferred schools about 3 weeks before this. I didn't respond. I kept walking. My hands were shaking a bit, and I was angry. I told my sergeant about the comment. He said the guy probably overheard staff talking or got information from another inmate who knew someone who knew me. That is possible. It's a small area. People talk. But it didn't feel like that, and I couldn't really explain why. The next day I was escorting him to a meeting with his attorney. He was cooperative as usual, walking ahead of me, and out of nowhere he said, "Davis is gonna quit, by the way. Probably by Friday." Davis was a newer CO, a young kid who seemed like he was adjusting fine. He hadn't had any complaints, and we didn't have any of him. I just ignored him, not responding to the comment. Thursday evening, Davis put in his resignation. When someone asked why, he said he'd been thinking about it for a while, and just couldn't do it anymore. He hadn't told anyone he was considering it. Word started to get around among the staff. A couple other COs had their own stories, too. One CO said the man told him his wife was going to call him during the shift with good news. And she did, about an hour later. She'd gotten a job offer. Another CO said the man told him to drive safe on Wednesday because of black ice. And that officer ended up hitting a patch on his way home that night, nearly crashing into a ditch. And what gets me is the guy isn't like some kind of mystic sitting there being cryptic and spiritual about it. He was witty and sharp, and he would say these things with a little smirk. He'd work them into normal conversation like it was some joke. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was just a clever guy making lucky guesses. But the accuracy was too consistent, and the details were often too specific. One evening I was doing final count and I stopped at his cell. He was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Without looking at me, he said, "You're a good man. That's going to make the next few years harder for you than it has to be." I stood there for a while. I so badly wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. I then kept on walking. He made bail 2 days later. He walked out as cooperative as he was when he went in, and he was still just as polite. He thanked the processing officer, collected his belongings, and he was gone. I looked up his case a few times after that. The assault charge got pled down. He got probation. He never did come back through our facility. As far as the system is concerned, he's just another name in the database. Eventually, I would tell this story to my wife. She's a nurse and has always been very practical. She said some people are just extremely perceptive and can read micro-expressions, body language, and patterns. A cold reading, she called it. That thing fake psychics would do on TV to impress people. And I get that. And I've thought about that explanation a lot. I mean, it could cover half of it, but it doesn't cover knowing about a seizure on a different block an hour before it happened. And it doesn't cover knowing a CO's wife got a job offer that the CO himself hadn't even known about yet. I've been doing this long enough that I don't spook easily. You can't. This job will eat you alive if you let every strange moment get to you. But I have never encountered anyone like that before or since. It wasn't that he knew things he shouldn't know. That alone I could maybe rationalize. But this man enjoyed it. It was amusing to him. Amusing like small talk. A way to pass the time, telling us these things and watching how we might react. And I still haven't forgotten about the being a good man will make things harder thing he said. Has he been right so far? Well, I'm not going to get into that, because I don't even know yet. You might find this man amazing, but I personally never want to see him again. The Pullover, from Ananya. I work about 40 minutes outside the town I live in. Most of my drive is a 2-lane rural highway. For long stretches at a time, there might be no streetlights at all. I pass a few farms, a gas station that closes at 9, and that's about it. I've probably driven through here over 100, maybe even 1,000 times by now. It was around 10:30 p.m. I'd stayed late to finish something up. There was almost nobody on the road at the time, which is normal for that time. About halfway through the drive, though, I noticed headlights behind me. They'd come up pretty fast and were now sitting close to me. They weren't tailgating me yet, but they were closer than you'd expect on an empty road when they could easily just pass. Then the lights started to flash, red and blue, mounted behind the grille. I thought, great, maybe I was going a little fast and didn't notice. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. The car pulled in behind me. I turned on my interior light, and I put the window down, grabbing my license. I sat there waiting. The car just sat there too, the lights still flashing but nobody getting out. After maybe a minute, I started to watch my mirrors more carefully. The car wasn't a cruiser. There was no light bar on top and no markings I could see. It looked like a regular dark SUV with those grille-mounted lights you can buy online. That was the first thing I thought was wrong. Then a figure stepped out. A figure with no uniform, just dark clothes. They had a flashlight and they were shining it low, walking slow. Not the way an officer approaches a vehicle. There was no radio chatter and no spotlight. Just a person walking toward me with his flashlight. My stomach dropped. I looked at the road ahead of me, and then I saw them. There was someone standing on the right side of the road about 50 yards ahead of where I'd pulled over. Just standing there on the edge of the tree line. I could barely make them out, because they appeared to be trying to hide. But the silhouette was clear enough in my headlights. I made a quick decision then. I put my window up, put the car back in drive, and pulled off the shoulder. I heard the person behind me shout something, but I was going. I did not look back at them. But as I passed where the man was hiding in the woods, something hit my car. I think he threw something at me. I floored it and didn't ease off the gas until I was back in town. I called the police when I got home, and they verified that that was not one of theirs. They sent someone out, but didn't find anyone or any vehicle on that stretch. They told me I did the right thing by leaving, and that if someone pulls me over and it doesn't feel right, I'm within my rights to drive to a well-lit public area. The officer I spoke with said they'd had similar reports on rural roads in the county before. These days I take a different route. It's a little longer, but I don't care. I'm not about to be ambushed by some freaks on the road again. I'm a daycare worker. There's something wrong with one of the kids. From JCL. As a daycare worker, you love your kids, especially the longer you're around them. But there's something that happened over the course of a few months that I still can't make sense of. We had this little girl in our program named Nora. She was 3 when she started. She was a very sweet kid, very imaginative. She talked a mile a minute, and her mom was great. She was always on time for pickup and packed good lunches, always asking how Nora's day was with actual interest. It seemed like a normal, loving family, at least from everything I could see. Now, Nora had a habit of talking to herself during free play. Nothing crazy for her age. Kids often have imaginary friends. They might narrate what they're doing, or even have full conversations with just stuffed animals. That's healthy, normal stuff. But after a few weeks, I started to notice that Nora's conversations had a consistency to them that stood out. It wasn't babbling. She would talk about specific things, and she left spaces for responses, and she would laugh at things that no one said. She'd set out 2 plates during pretend kitchen, always 2, and say, "Here you go, Callie." I asked her once during snack time, "Who's Callie, sweetheart?" "My sister," she said. I didn't think much beyond that. Nora was an only child according to our information. Kids invent siblings all the time. I just said, "Oh, that's nice," and I went on with my day. Over the next few weeks, Callie came up more and more. Nora would get upset if another child sat in a specific chair at her table, because that's where Callie sits. During nap time, she'd scoot over on her mat and whisper. One afternoon, I heard her say, "Callie, stop, you're cold." She didn't seem scared, just annoyed. My coworker, Diane, noticed it too. She mentioned that Nora had told her Callie doesn't go home with her, that Callie stays here. That's when the weird feeling about this whole situation started. Imaginary friends usually follow their kid everywhere. This one apparently lived at the daycare. I brought it up casually with Nora's mom at pickup one day. I said Nora had been playing with an imaginary friend named Callie, and that I thought it was quite cute. But her mom's face did something I can't fully describe. It didn't fall exactly, but it kind of froze. She recovered quick and smiled, saying, "Oh, she's got quite the imagination." She changed the subject to what Nora had for lunch and left. It was fast. Too fast. I let it go. It wasn't my place to push. Things got stranger after that. Not with Nora, but with the daycare itself. Toys would be out in the morning when I opened up, and I don't mean messed up or scattered. They appeared carefully placed, as if a kid had been playing with them and left them out neatly. There would be a few crayons on the table, a picture book open on the floor, the toy kitchen set with a pot on the little stove. I assumed the closing staff just missed them during cleanup, but when I asked, they swore everything was put away. Our closing checklist is thorough. Every bin gets checked, every surface gets wiped. This happened 3 times in 1 week, and by the 3rd time I began to take photos of how I left the room at close, comparing them to what I found in the morning. Things were being moved. I knew for sure now. Diane started to feel uneasy too. She told me that during nap time one afternoon, she counted the kids on the mats and got 21. She counted again and got 20. She said she was probably just tired, but she looked rattled, telling me about it. Then there was the night that changed everything for me. We had a parent event one evening, a sort of open house, so families could see the classroom and meet each other. It wrapped up around 7:30. Afterwards, I stayed behind to clean up and reset the room. Diane had already left. The building was empty at the time. I had the lights on in the main room and the hallway, but the rest of the building was dark. I was wiping down tables when I heard a giggling sound from the hallway that leads to the bathrooms. It was clearly a child's laugh. Clear and close, no mistaking it. Someone was in the building with me. I stopped and listened, but I didn't hear anything else just yet. I told myself it had to just be pipes or the building settling somehow, maybe my brain playing tricks. I went back to cleaning, But then I heard it again, this time closer, right around the corner. I walked to the hallway. The lights were on, but the bathroom doors were open and dark inside. I looked down the hall. There was nobody there, but the air felt different, heavier even, and much colder. I turned back toward the main room, and I saw her. There was a child standing in the far corner of the classroom near the toy kitchen. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old. She was standing there, facing the kitchen set, like she was in the middle of playing. She had dark hair, and she was wearing what looked like a light-colored dress, but there was something wrong. She was incredibly still, absolutely motionless. Kids that age don't sit that still. They shift and fidget and run around, but this child was motionless. I couldn't move. I stood there with a wet rag in my hand and simply stared at this child that shouldn't be there. My chest was so tight, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Eventually I said, "Hello?" And my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. She turned her head towards me, just her head, slowly. Her face was pale, and her eyes were open, looking right at me now. But behind those eyes there was nothing. No anger or sadness, just nothingness. I dropped the rag and grabbed my keys and my bag, and I left. I ran to my car and called Diane, telling her everything. She said to me that she believed me. The next morning I called our director, and I told her what happened. She's a kind but practical woman. She said it was probably a shadow or exhaustion from the event. I wasn't going to argue with my boss. About a week later, I looked something up that I probably shouldn't have. Nora's enrollment file had her mother's full name. I searched online for the family, and I eventually found something. An obituary from a few years before Nora was born. A baby girl, and her name was Callie. She had died at 11 months. The cause of death was not listed. I never said anything to Nora's mom, and I'm not going to. That poor woman lost a child, and whatever is happening at the daycare isn't hurting anyone. Nora's not scared. She talks to her sister like it's the most normal thing, and maybe for her it is. But even so, I'm not about to stay alone in that building anymore. I just won't. When I have to close, Diane closes with me every time now. These experiences have stopped now. Maybe it's just a gap in encounters. I am happy for Nora that she gets to see her sister. As long as Callie leaves me alone, we won't have a problem. Something lives under the town. From Anonymous. I want to be clear here. In this story, I'm not talking about rats. And I'm not talking about raccoons or possums that wander into storm drains. Those are easy to differentiate, be it in person or on camera, when we send inspection units down the line. Basically, we know how animals move in tunnels. But what I've been encountering over the past 2 years as a sewer maintenance worker is no animal. The first time was during a routine inspection of an older section of the system on the east side. These are the bigger tunnels, some of them built in the 50s, and tall enough to walk through if you hunch. I was in there with my partner, checking for root intrusion. We had headlamps and a handheld spotlight. About 300 feet in, my partner stopped and said, "You hear that?" I listened for a second. There was a sound ahead of us that I can only describe as breathing. We stood there for about 10 more seconds, but then the breathing stopped. Ray made a joke about the city having its own Ninja Turtles situation, and we kept going. We didn't find anything unusual in the tunnel that day. But when we got back to the truck, I noticed Ray locked his doors, and that man never locks his door. A few months after that, we sent a camera down a line that had been backing up in a residential neighborhood. This was a standard CCTV inspection. I was watching the feed from the van. The camera rolled through about 600 feet of normal pipe. But then the image jerked. There was no static or interference or anything, but the camera physically moved, like something had bumped into it. The cable went taut for a second and then released. When the image stabilized, There were marks on the wall of the pipe that had not been there before in previous inspections. Long vertical scrapes in the buildup, 4 of them to be precise, like fingers dragged through. I noted this in the report as possible tool marks from prior maintenance, but I knew that it wasn't. Over the following year, I started keeping a personal log. Sounds in sections of the system where there's no access point for animals to enter. A smell I'd catch occasionally that wasn't sewage. It was sour, almost acidic, and it would come and go in pockets like something had just passed through. Twice I found what I could only call nesting. Piles of debris pushed together in dry sections of larger tunnels. Rags and plastics and leaves, all mounted in a deliberate way. These were not washed together by flow. They had been arranged. The one that made me a believer happened about 6 months back. I was alone in a maintenance access chamber, doing a valve check. It's a concrete room, about 8 by 8 feet, with 2 tunnels feeding into it. I was wearing my headlamp, and I was crouched over the valve when I heard movement in the tunnel to my left. Slow and cautious sounding movement. Reminded me of someone sneaking around in shallow water. I quickly pointed my light into the tunnel. About 20 feet in, just at the edge of where the beam started to fade, I saw something pull back around the curve of the pipe. It was pale, and it moved on 2 legs. It was fast, but not panicked. It retreated, almost looking afraid. There was no sound after that. Whatever it was, it moved in near silence. Well, when it wanted to. I reported this as a possible trespasser. The city sent someone to check the access points in the area. But all were locked, and all were secure. They found no sign of a forced entry, or anyone living down there in the usual sense, like camps or trash or clothing. But they did point out the nesting piles I'd found before, but the inspector shrugged them off, blaming it on debris accumulation. My partner won't talk about it with me anymore. Says that if he wants to keep doing this job normally, that he doesn't want to think about it. But just last month, he requested a transfer to water treatment, and I know exactly why. He wants to get out of the sewers. No idea what's really down there, and I don't know if it's one thing or more than one. But it's bipedal, it's fast, and it's smart enough to avoid cameras and retreat from light. Scariest of all is that it's quiet and very good at hiding. Tonight's first story, the firefighter one, was pretty creepy. Short, but my favorite this episode. Reminds me of some short horror film I found back in the day, of this thing mimicking a baby's cry before eating some woman. Good stuff. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Make sure to follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube at the Darkness Prevails channel, and all your favorite podcast apps to help us grow. Thank you. And if you have a scary work-related story, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. Till next time, everyone, I'll be clocking out, because if I get back home late again, my wife will destroy me, and my toddlers will nibble at my remains. So I'll be clocking out for now, but I'll be back again real soon. I am a pluviophile. I find comfort and joy in the rain and under dark skies. If you're like me, enjoy the next rainy day as long as you can, because it might be your last. This story from an anonymous sender will instead make you fear when the droplets begin to come down. This story is titled, The Impaler of Olympic National Park. It is a bizarre and terrifying account of something that lives in a popular national forest, something that has been taking people and animals alike for decades. If you want to survive, there are some rules you will need to follow. Most importantly, if you're hiking in Olympic National Park when it starts to rain, evacuate immediately. I can never forget what I saw in the Hoh rainforest, or what it did to the 4 of us afterward. But it taught us something. It taught us that if you're ever in Olympic National Park, there are rules you must follow. I'll start from here. Ever since I was 12 years old, I've been a naturalist. I love nature, I love animals, and studying them and observing them has always been my passion and hobby. My girlfriend Jules and I drove out to the Olympic Peninsula last May. We rented a cabin near Forks and spent a long weekend hiking, with the Hoh Rainforest as the centerpiece. I had been wanting to see the Hoh for years. Temperate rainforests like this are rare ecosystems. The Hoh is one of the most intact examples remaining in North America. It gets 12 feet of annual rainfall. The Sitka spruce germinated when the Roman Empire was still standing. The place has some of the highest biomass per acre measurements ever recorded outside the tropics. Now, my Jules is the kind of girl who makes a room feel different when she walks in. She's much livelier, more charged than myself. She has strong opinions and zero patience for the easy route. When we go hiking together, she's always pushing for the longer loop, the steeper trails, the summit attempt when the weather's going marginal. She'll give you endless crap for turning back too early. But she will not hike after dark. Ever. I learned this on maybe our 4th or 5th trip. That time we misjudged a day hike, and twilight caught us, still 2 miles from the trailhead. I suggested we push through. I had a headlamp. The trail was well marked. But she said no, and the way she said it, it was clear this was not negotiable. We sort of jogged the final stretch in fading light, and she didn't speak the entire way. When we made it to the car, she would not look at me. I've never pushed her on it. Everyone carries something, you know. The drive into the Hoh was everything I'd hoped for, and something more than that, but I couldn't quite name it at the time. The road follows the river through the forest, which closes overhead until you're moving through a green tunnel. I had my window down, even though it was a misty day. That smell was something nice. Just that smell of things being alive. We parked at the visitor center and started on the Hall of Mosses trail. That famous one, the postcard, and it deserved the reputation. The big leaf maples arched overhead like cathedral ribs, draped with these curtains of club moss. A varied thrush called from somewhere in the canopy. That single ethereal note that sounds less like birdsong and more like the forest was asking us something personal. Jules was in a good mood too, making jokes about the spooky vibes, doing an ironic Blair Witch angle with her phone. I was cataloging species in my head, the way I always do. Polysticomunitum, Acer macrophyllum. Everything had a name, everything fit. We continued on to the Hoh River Trail, which winds deeper into the valley. The rain started about a mile in. It was light and steady. This is the kind of rain the Hoh receives about 300 days a year. I had packed shells for both of us, so we kept walking. About 4 miles in, something caught my eye off trail. A flash of color that didn't belong there. It was too bright and orange. I thought it might be a varied thrush on the ground, which would be unusual behavior worth investigating, or maybe a late flush of chanterelles. I told Jules I wanted to check it out. She rolled her eyes at me, but followed anyway. It wasn't a bird. About 30 feet off the trail, and maybe 12 feet up a big leaf maple. There was a coyote. It took me several seconds to process what I was actually seeing. My brain kept trying to rearrange the image into something that made more sense, kind of like an optical illusion. This was definitely a coyote, though, and it had been impaled on a broken branch right through its midsection, just behind the ribs. The animal hung there with its head lolled to one side, legs dangling. The orange I'd glimpsed was actually more red now. It was exposed muscle tissue, where something had torn at the hindquarters. The damage looked relatively fresh. Days, I would guess. A week at most. The body hadn't even begun to bloat yet. There was something about this that was simply wrong, because it looked like something had put it here on purpose. I tried to shake that thought. Anthropomorphizing nature is a rookie mistake, but the thought lingered in my mind. The way the body had been hung there was not happenstance. Jesus, Jules said behind me. I moved closer without even deciding to. My naturalist brain took over. This was data, a puzzle requiring a solution. Did you know that cougars have been known to stash prey in trees? That was my first thought, the most logical explanation. Puma concolor will drag a kill into the canopy to keep it away from scavengers. I'd seen photographs of it in journals, and I knew about the behavior. But the longer I studied that carcass, the less it made sense. You see, when a cougar caches prey, it drags the animal up by climbing. The carcass ends up draped over a branch, pulled from below by a predator ascending with its kill clamped in powerful jaws. This coyote had not been draped. It had been deliberately pushed onto the branch stub with enough force to cause it to be impaled through the thorax. Judging by the angle, the force came from above, not from the side, not from below. The branch itself was maybe 2 inches in diameter. A cougar weighs between 80 and 200 pounds. That branch would not support such weight, let alone a cougar maneuvering a carcass into position. "Do you think a cougar did that?" Jules asked, already sharing my brain cells. "I don't think so. It's not the right angle, and a cougar would lay the kill over the branch. Certainly not, well, this." "So, what do you think did it?" Well, I had no answer for that. A Pacific wren sang somewhere nearby, that cascading trill. The rain continued pattering on the canopy. The forest went about its business despite the dead coyote, completely indifferent. "Let's head back," Joel said. The trailhead parking lot was almost empty when we got back. Just our rental car and one other vehicle, a battered Toyota pickup with Washington plates. An older man was sitting on the tailgate, about mid-60s. Gave off real "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive" vibes. "Get out to the river?" "About 4 miles in. Beautiful out there." "Sure is. Best rainforest in the lower 48. He took a sip from his thermos. "You know the rule about the rain out here, right?" I laughed, assuming he was joking. "Let me guess. Bring a good shell?" He didn't smile. Instead, he sort of stared at me for a moment, then blinked. No. The old-timers around here say if the rain quits on you sudden, really sudden, like someone turned off a faucet, it's best to head back to your car. Sooner the better." He shrugged. "Probably nothing. Just what they say. Just making sure you know." In the car, Jules was quiet. Now, she usually talks my ear off on drives. This time she just stared at the trees sliding past. "That coyote was so weird," she finally said. "You're not wrong about that." "Surely you don't think a cougar actually did that?" "No, I don't." I was expecting her to ask more questions, but she didn't. We drove back to the cabin without another word. That night I could barely sleep. I kept thinking about that damned coyote. I simply could not figure out what kind of animal would do that, and the idea of a person doing it made my blood boil. Sure, some people think of coyotes as pests, but why impale it on a branch? There were no other wounds on it to indicate it had been dead before being impaled. What a cruel thing to do to an animal, even if it is a pest. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep and went over to my laptop. I googled random things at first. Hoh rainforest coyote tree, Olympic Peninsula predation unusual, animal carcass impaled branch. But most results were useless. After maybe an hour, I found an old hiking forum, an old remnant from the early 2000s, mostly dead threads and broken image links. The interface was dated, all that early internet aesthetic of clunky frames and too small fonts. Someone had posted, though, about finding a deer carcass impaled in a tree near the Hoh River Trail. They'd asked if anyone knew what could do that. There was one reply, a ranger, telling them it was storm damage catching carcasses, which is the kind of explanation you give when you don't have one and don't want to admit it. I kept on digging. A 2011 post on a different forum described what they called a bone tree. Multiple small animal remains stuck on branches in a single hemlock, arranged at different heights. There were squirrels, birds. They'd taken photos, but sadly the links were dead. The poster described it as almost decorative, like Christmas ornaments, except disturbing. They'd asked other hikers if this was normal for the area. No one had replied. I found 3 more posts across different sites, different years, all describing similar things. Animals impaled, at heights or angles that weren't quite right. Each post had few or no replies. People were encountering these things, even documenting them, but the silence of the internet swallowed their questions whole. But then I found one that made me sit back from the screen. A thread from back in 2007, titled, "Does anyone know the rules for the Hoh River Trail?" The post read, "A man at the visitor center gave me a list, but I lost it, and I want to make sure I have them right before we go back. Something about the rain, I think, and something about animals and trees. I can't remember the rest, but he made it sound important." The post had no replies. I clicked on the user profile. The user had only ever made one post. This one. The account had been created the same day and never used again. Either they got the information they needed through other means, or they went back without it. I found myself wondering which it was, and then I found myself not wanting to know. Five months later, I went back. I know how that sounds, but that first night of searching had only been the beginning. Over the months that followed, I kept digging. Old forums led to archived trip reports. Archived trip reports led to out-of-print trail guides. I was pulling threads and more kept coming loose. Here's what I found. A passage in a 1973 trail guide to Olympic National Park mentioned, almost parenthetically, unusual predation patterns observed in the Hoh Valley, possibly attributable to an unidentified large predator. Beyond that, there was no elaboration. Just that sentence in a section about wildlife hazards. I also found a 2014 blog post by a woman who had done a season as a park ranger in Olympic. She mentioned that during her first week, a senior ranger had given her a list of unofficial rules for the Hoh River Trail. They are as follows. 1. If the rain stops unexpectedly, return to your vehicle immediately. Number 2. If you hear rain but cannot feel it, retrace your steps, you are too close. Number 3. If you find animal remains above head height, do not run. Walk back the way you came without stopping. Number 4. Do not camp in the Hoh during active rainfall. She treated them, though, as quirky local superstition, the same category as the tourists who claim to see Bigfoot. But then she added something that stayed with me. It said, "The senior ranger who gave me these rules had been working the Hoh for 31 years. When I asked him if he believed them, he just said, 'I'm still here, aren't I?'" Now, I also happened upon the database of missing persons cases in Olympic National Park. The park has one of the highest disappearance rates in the country. Most are hikers who got lost, fell, had medical emergencies. The majority are eventually found. But there is a subset that aren't. Hikers who vanished on clear trails in good weather. Hikers whose last known locations were on or near the Hoh. Hikers who disappeared during heavy rain. I cross-referenced the disappearance dates with historical weather data. It took a while, but when I was done, I had some sort of pattern. A great number of the unsolved cases clustered in the wettest months. October, November, March. The months when the rain falls for days without stopping. The thing, whatever it was, seemed to be active when it rained. The rain brought it out, or woke it up, or called to it somehow. I showed Jules some of this. She read the blog post with the rules, handed my phone back, then said, "That's strange," but then changed the subject. October came. My cousin Ty called to say he and his girlfriend would be in Seattle for a long weekend, asking if we wanted to meet up. Ty and I grew up together. Our moms are sisters, and we spent every summer at our grandparents' place outside Spokane, running through the woods and building forts, catching frogs in the creek. He's 3 years my senior, and when we were kids, that gap felt enormous. He was my big cousin, the one who knew all the things, I followed him around trying to impress him. Now we're both adults and the age difference kind of means nothing, but that dynamic persists underneath. He still makes me feel like the world is simpler than it's become. Ty is a big guy, 6'2" with broad shoulders. I recall his high school coaches refusing to leave him alone about football. He's also very charismatic. When he laughs, everyone tends to laugh around him. But when Ty is quiet, you know something is wrong. His girlfriend, Kel, was new. They'd been together about 8 months. I'd only met her once, very briefly, at a family thing in July. She was a small thing, dark-haired. She has a face that's more interesting than conventionally pretty. She's from Portland and works at a literacy nonprofit. She's not outdoorsy like the rest of us are. They came over for dinner. Jules made pasta and I made a salad. We drank wine together, Ty telling stories about his job. He's an electrician, and apparently electricians witness a lot of human foolishness. Kel was quieter but pretty sharp, not afraid to ask questions. I liked her. At some point, Ty asked what we'd been up to, and I mentioned the Ho trip from spring. Hear me out, I didn't plan to go into detail about everything, but it just came out. I described the trail and the trip and the sights, and I kinda just brought up the impaled coyote. You know, how you do. His eyebrows instantly raised. God, so what do you think did it? I don't know, man. That's what's been bothering me. I've been Googling it. There's all this strange material, like from old forums and stuff. I found a few mentions of informal rules rangers pass down. Kinda makes me want to go back, look for more evidence. Dude, I am so in, Ty said. Kel looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Jules was giving me a look I couldn't interpret. How about a 2-day trip? I said. Backpack in, camp one night, hike out. October's the rainy season, so we'd be more likely to see whatever there is to see. Babe, Kel put her hand on Ty's arm. You want to go camping in a forest with a mystery predator in the rain? It'll be fun. When's the last time you did something adventurous? Kel looked at Jules. Well, are you going? Jules hesitated a fraction of a second. Yeah, I'm going. Do not camp in the Ho during active rainfall. That rule kept playing back in my mind, the one I'd read in that ranger's blog. I'd thought about it quite a lot, and there I was, deciding to take 4 people I cared about, including my cousin's girlfriend who had never been backpacking in her life, into the Ho during the wettest month of the year, to camp overnight. But I kept telling myself these were rules meant to scare people. They were exaggerated. Every national park, every local forest, has campfire stories that had gotten inflated over decades. If we were careful, and were already experienced, most of us, whatever was out there, assuming anything even was, we could handle it. I could handle it. I was wrong about all of that. We drove up on Friday morning. The rain started long before we hit the park. It was steady but soaking rain, turning the world around us gray and muffled. Kel was staring at the trees, reminded me of Jules on our drive back that day. Oh God, this is where horror movies happen, she said, her chin on her palm. The Ho in October is a different forest than the one I'd fallen for in May. This time of year, the big leaf maples have dropped their leaves, exposing the architecture of the canopy. Those massive trunks and interlocking branches, they look like vast skeletons. The moss hangs darker and more saturated, and everything is dripping wet. The hike in was still fun and massively refreshing. It was good to be out with my cousin and my girlfriend. Good to get to know Kel. But then, about 5 miles in, we found another one. It was a raccoon this time. What was left of the animal was 20 feet up, impaled on a branch about 1.5 inches in diameter. The body was desiccated, most of the fur gone. It had been there a while. Ty came up beside me. Huh, he said. Kel looked, saw it, then looked away, especially quick. Why is it up there like that? That's the big question, I said. I was already calculating. The branch was too thin for any animal I knew to climb it, and once again the angle was wrong. The same wrong angle as the coyote. Ty was watching my face, trying to get a read on me. Man, what exactly are we looking for out here? We made camp around 4 p.m., 30 yards off the trail near the river. The rain had intensified. Setting up tents in that weather was miserable. Kel's hands were trembling from the cold by the time we got her tent up. We ate dinner huddled under a tarp. The rain was drumming overhead. Our conversation stayed light. Ty told a story about a hunting trip that had gone wrong. At one point, Kel talked about her college roommate who had joined a cult. Jules did an impression of her boss. I liked that. I never brought up the rules, and in my head I kept telling myself we would be fine. We turned in around 9 p.m. Jules fell asleep within moments. She's always been able to sleep anywhere. Makes me jealous. I lay there just listening to things. I could hear the rain on the tent fly, water dripping from branches, the river in the distance, normal sounds. And eventually I did sleep. I'm not sure when, but I did. However, I know exactly when I woke up. When the rain stopped. It didn't taper off or fade out. The rain, all at once, simply stopped, and immediately, that man's words came back to me. Like someone had turned off a faucet. This was exactly that. One moment, the steady drumming on the tent fly, the drips, the patter. These had been our constant companions for hours. But suddenly, nothing. And the silence was so complete, it felt like my eardrums were going to pop. I lay there in the dark, wide awake. More of the old man's words came back to me. If the rain quits on you sudden, really sudden, you want to head back to your car. We were 5 miles from the car. It was the middle of the night. There was no heading back for us. Jules stirred beside me. The rain stopped, she murmured, half asleep. Yeah, it did. That's weird. She was already drifting off again. So quiet now. But as I lay there, my ears continuing to strain, I realized it wasn't just quiet. It felt like it was bracing itself, waiting for something. But then, the first deer screamed. A black-tailed deer in distress makes a sound somewhere between a bleat and a scream, a nasally, high-pitched alarm call that means predator. I've heard it before. What was unusual was the second deer, followed by a third and a fourth. Within 30 seconds, the forest around our campsite erupted. Dozens of deer, all of them screaming at once. The sound became so loud, it filled the tent, filled my skull, until there was no room for even a thought. Jules grabbed my arm suddenly. Nathan, what? I don't know. From the other tent, Ty's voice called. What the hell? Kel was crying. I reached for my headlamp. Jules' hand clamped down on my wrist. Don't. Her voice was terrified. I'd never heard her so scared, like panic taken up a notch. Don't open the tent. Please don't go outside, please. I stopped. The deer, though, they kept screaming. Some very close to us, within 50 feet, I think, maybe even closer. I could hear them crashing through the brush, breaking twigs and branches, the heavy thud of hooves on wet earth. And still no rain. The silence between their screams was so unreal, unnatural. There should have been rain. This was the Ho in October. There was always rain. Then, something else moved through the forest, and it passed maybe 20 feet from our tent. I heard it clearly in that terrible silence. Heavy footfalls, fast, but it didn't match up to any quadruped I could remember. For something so heavy, it was very nimble. with this odd syncopation that made me think of something moving on limbs that weren't quite equal in length. And the sound of it pushing through vegetation was so strange because it was so high up. Was it really that tall, that it could move through shoulder-high brush that quickly? I tried to track its movement by listening. Left to right, I thought, toward the river. But then the direction seemed to shift, and for one horrible moment, I couldn't tell if it was moving away from us or toward us. Jules' grip on my arm was the only thing keeping me grounded. I could feel her shaking, small but constant tremors that translated through her fingertips into my skin. Neither of us spoke, and we were both desperately trying to calm our breathing. These sounds continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes the screams were distant, up the valley. Sometimes they were close enough that I expected a panicked deer to crash through our tent. At one point, something big hit the ground about 100 yards away. A big, wet thump, something with significant weight meeting the earth. But gradually, all of it faded. The screams became less frequent, the crashing subsided. The footfalls did not return. But the rain came back, and it returned the same way it had stopped. All at once, the breaker had been turned back on. It was like the last hour had been a nightmare. Unfortunately, it was real. I could still hear Kel crying quietly in the other tent, and I could feel Jules' grip on my arm, her fingers cramping from holding so tight for so long. We lay there until dawn, not speaking, and definitely not sleeping. Morning came. There was a gray mist all around us. We packed our things in near silence. Ty's face was pale and Kel moved like a sleepwalker. Jules, however, was focused, quick, and efficient. But she didn't meet anyone's eyes. "We should go back the way we came," Kel said. I shook my head. "That would take longer. The loop is shorter going forward." "I don't care. I want to go back the way we know." "He's right, Kel," Ty said. "Forward is faster." She stopped arguing then. She just shouldered her pack and started walking. Now here comes the messed up part. Those deer we heard crying all night. Well, we found them about a mile from our camp. 7 of them, at least. Black-tailed deer arranged in a loose cluster of Sitka spruce just off the trail. They had been impaled on branches at different heights. The lowest was about 8 feet up, the highest 25. Some were on thick branches, shoved onto them like grotesque ornaments. Others were on thinner branches that had punched through their softer tissue. The wood glistened red. God, one of them was still alive. A doe impaled through the hindquarters about 15 feet up. Her front legs were kicking, though weakly, scrabbling at nothing. She was making a thin, barely audible sound. I saw her eyes. They were open and rolling. I watched Kel as she moved off the trail 10 feet, bent over, and threw up. Jules stared at the doe that was still alive. Her face was completely still, and when she spoke, her voice cracked. "We need to leave. Right now." We hiked faster. I kept my eyes on the trail, on my feet, on anything except the trees around us, and I didn't dare to look up. After we made it to the car, Ty was the first to speak. "What the hell was that?" Now, I've got to be honest. Up to this point, I mentioned that there were rules, but I didn't say what the rules were. Not to Ty and Cal. But this was when I came clean, so to speak. I told them all about the rules. All 4. The rain stopping, which had happened. Then about the rain you can hear but not feel. The animal remains above head height. And the 4th. The rule I got my friends and I to deliberately break together. When I finished, Jules looked at me. She was angry. "How long have you known about this?" "A few months," I said. "Since after our first trip. Honey, I told you. I even showed you on my phone these rules I found. All you said was, 'That's strange, remember?'" She rolled her eyes. "I don't remember that. But even if that's true, you didn't think to bring it back up before you took us out there to camp? Ty and Kel had no idea." She didn't speak to me for the rest of the drive. That night, I had a dream. I was high up, higher than any tree, higher than anywhere I'd been. I could feel the height in my stomach somehow, but I wasn't falling. I was stable, looking straight up at the sky. The clouds were dark and moving fast, close enough to touch. The rain was falling from them, but falling up, rising from somewhere below me into the churning gray sky. I didn't feel scared, though. It was weird. I felt calm instead, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. At 4 a.m., I woke up and I went outside. I stood in our backyard for about an hour, and when I came back in, I realized I'd been staring at the top of the neighbor's Douglas fir the entire time. 3 weeks passed after Jules and I talked about it directly. We'd been sort of circling each other, polite but distant, sleeping in the same bed but not touching. We would eat dinner with the TV on so we didn't have to fill the silence ourselves. I knew she was furious at me, but I knew I deserved it. Eventually, the conversation happened. She was doing dishes, her back turned toward me. She suddenly stopped. I keep seeing the one that was still alive." "The doe?" "Yes. Her legs were moving. She was trying to run, but there was nowhere for her to go. I've seen animals die before, but I've never seen anything like that. It was so different, so horrible. She didn't even understand what had happened to her. She was just stuck there, waiting to slowly die." "I know, hon." "Do you?" She turned around. Her eyes were red. "You knew the rules. You knew there was something out there, and you took us anyway. You even took Kel, who had never been backpacking before once in her life, because you were so curious." She was right. "You're going to tell me everything you know about this. All of it. Tonight." And so I did. A week after that, I found this ethnographic study. It started as a footnote, a reference in a 1936 survey of Pacific Northwest indigenous oral traditions. The footnote mentioned an unpublished chapter from an earlier work, a study conducted in the 1910s by a researcher named Ellison, who'd spent 2 years living among the Quileute, documenting their traditional knowledge. The chapter had been cut from the final publication. The footnote didn't say why. I spent 3 days tracking down what had happened to Ellison's original manuscript. Most of it had been published in 1919 to moderate academic interest, but the missing chapter, the one referenced in that footnote, had been deposited separately in the University of Washington's Special Collections Archive. They would not let me check it out, but I was able to see it while I was there. I'm going to recall it from my memory as best I can. Ellison's chapter was about predators. The first several pages documented Quileute knowledge of the animals that shared their territory: black bears, cougars, and wolves, standard ethnographic material. But one section was different. It ran for nearly 15 handwritten pages, and Ellison's notes became increasingly detailed, as though he'd recognized he was documenting something unusual. One section stopped me cold. Ellison had transcribed an interview with an elder, a man he identified only as J.K., age approximately 70. The passage was set apart from the rest of the chapter, as though Ellison wanted to preserve the exact words. This is what it said. "My grandmother told me this when I was young, and her grandmother told her. There is something in the deep forest that is not a spirit. It is an animal, same as the elk, same as the bear. But it is older than the elk, older than the bear. It lives in the branches where the moss hangs thick, and it comes down when the rain is heavy. You will know it is near because the rain will stop, like a door closing. When this happens, you do not look. You do not call out. You run until the rain touches your face again. There is another way to know. If you walk too far into the deep places, you will hear the rain, but you will not feel it. The water falls around you, but not on you. This means you have gone where it lives, and you must go back. Do not go forward. Do not look up. It keeps what it catches on the branches, like fish hung to dry. If you see animals in the trees with the branches through them, you walk away slowly. No running. Running is what the elk do. Running is what it wants. My grandmother's brother did not listen. He went into the forest during the long rains to prove there was nothing there, but he did not come back. In the spring they found what was left of him in a sitka, very high up. My grandmother did not speak his name again after that. This is not a story I'm telling you. This is what is true. Ellison had added his own commentary below the transcription. His handwriting became cramped here, the letters much smaller. It was like he was afraid of being overheard, even though it was just words. It read, I have now interviewed 9 individuals from 3 families. Their accounts are remarkably consistent. They speak of this creature the way they speak of cougars, as a known danger to be avoided, not as a legend to be feared. But I have found no physical evidence. To include such an extraordinary claim would end my career. I have cut this chapter. I pray I am making the right decision. The dreams kept coming. Every few nights, that same place, impossibly high, looking up at churning clouds, the rain falling upward, that feeling of belonging. During the day, I started to notice things. I'd realize I'd been staring at roof lines, thinking about angles. I'd find myself in parking garages, gravitating toward the upper levels. One afternoon, I stood on a step stool in the kitchen, reaching for, well, nothing. No memory of even climbing up. That was when Ty called me. Hey man, this is gonna sound weird, but have you been having strange urges since we got back? My stomach knotted up. What kind? Alright man, don't judge me, but I keep picking at thorns, blackberry bushes, roses. I'll find myself pressing my fingers against them. The other day I was in the backyard, right? Supposedly checking the gutters, and lost some time. And when I snapped out of it, my thumb was pressed against a thorn hard enough to draw blood. Bro, I don't remember doing that. I was quiet for a moment. He continued. And here's the messed up part. It felt right, like scratching an itch I didn't even know I had. Have you been having dreams, too? Like about being up high? He went quiet as well for a second, then replied. Christ, man, now that I think about it, yeah. Dreams about staring at the clouds or something? Rain going up instead of down? Jesus, Ty. That's exactly what I've been dreaming about. Aw, man, what's happening to us? Something was happening to Jules, too. She wasn't sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find her in the living room with all the lights on, watching TV with the sound off. She'd started leaving the bathroom light on when we went to bed. She stopped suggesting hikes, too. Eventually, one time I suggested a day trip, she declined, and I pushed. Is this about the hoe? She flinched like I'd struck her. Don't. Jules, you don't get to push me into this, she snapped. You took us out there knowing things we didn't. And now I can't. She stopped and took a breath. I used to be scared of the dark. When I was a kid. Really scared, not normal kid scared. I couldn't sleep without a light on until I was 12. Power outages made me hyperventilate so badly, my parents had to put a bag over my mouth. They took me to a therapist who told them it would pass, and it didn't pass. It just went underground. Jules had never told me any of this. 3 years together, she had never once mentioned it. I was convinced something lived in the dark, she continued. Not a monster. I knew monsters weren't real, even as a kid. But something else. Something that belonged there and waited there. I used to lie awake at night and feel something watching me. And I just knew if I got out of bed, if I put my feet on the floor in the dark, something would take me somewhere, and I would never come back. I thought I got over it. That's why I started to hike with you, to prove the fear was behind me, and that I could walk into the dark and nothing would happen. And it worked. I thought it worked. I could handle the woods at dusk. I could almost handle the dark itself. I told myself the thing I'd been afraid of as a kid was just a child's imagination. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were wet. The hoe broke something. Whatever wall I'd built, it's gone. The fear never went away. I just buried it. And now it's back, worse than before, because now I know there's actually something out there. Now I know that thing I'd felt watching me as a kid, it wasn't my imagination. It was preparation. My body was trying to tell me something true, and I spent 20 years convincing myself it was lying. I got a call from Kel 3 days later. She said, "I need to tell you something about the campsite." "What is it, Kel?" "That morning, when we were packing up, before we found the deer, there were marks on the trunk of the Sitka spruce directly over your tent. Long scratches. They looked like claws. The wood was still wet." I felt the blood leave my face. Something had descended the tree that we were sleeping under. It came down while we were in the tent, inches from the fabric, and passed us by. "It was right there. What was it? Why didn't it?" "I don't know, Kel. I don't know." But then I thought for a moment. Jules' grip on my arm, her desperate refusal to let me move. We stayed inside, we stayed still through it all. So maybe I knew deep down. It wasn't interested in prey that didn't run. I called Ty afterward, telling him what Kel told me. She hadn't told him yet, wanted to call us first. Ty said to me on the phone call, "I almost went outside that night. I heard those deer screaming and I thought, well, I don't know what I thought. That I could help or see what it was. I even had my hand on the zipper. Thankfully, Kel grabbed my waist, the same way you said Jules grabbed you." "Thank God for women, am I right?" "Yeah, true. We were in the middle of it, man. That thing walked right past us. It could have taken any of us, but it didn't. If our girls hadn't been scared for us, we'd probably be dead." 6 days after my call with Ty, Kel called again, but she was crying. "It's Ty. I came home and he was in the garage. There's so much blood." "Kel, it's okay. Is he alive? Where is he now?" "Yes, he's okay right now, I think. We're at the ER. He told the doctors it was a gardening accident, but I saw it. He was sitting on the floor. He had one of my rose stems and he was pressing the thorns into his finger, one at a time in a row. There was blood on his hands, his jeans, the concrete, and he was just sitting there calm. When I screamed his name, he looked up and his eyes were just, I don't know, he just wasn't there." "Oh my God, Kel." "But then he sort of came back. He looked at his hand and screamed. He'd driven a thorn through his fingertip, through the nail bed. It came out on the other side. In the car afterward, he asked me, 'What did that place do to us?'" That night, Jules stood in my office doorway. "You can't sleep either?" "No." She looked at these spreadsheets, maps, and photographs. "You want to go back?" I was thinking about how to answer that, but then she said, "I'll go with you." I turned around. "What?" "If I don't go back, I'll be afraid of the woods forever. Every time it rains, I'll think about those deer. I won't let it take that from me. The fear wins if I never face it. But we do it my way. A day hike only, in before dawn, out before dark. If I say we leave, we leave. And the second the rain stops, even for a moment, we run. I looked at her, and I said, "Okay, your way." We went back the last week of November. Just Jules and me. Ty wasn't coming. His injuries were still healing, and his new fixation had not yet faded. He'd catch himself reaching for the rose bushes, having to physically redirect his hand. We drove up the night before, staying at the same cabin outside Forks. Neither of us slept very well. Instead, we mostly lay in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof, not talking. We left for the trailhead at 5 a.m. The rain was heavy, headlights reflecting back in a solid white wall. The parking lot was empty when we arrived. Nobody likes the hoe in late November in a rainstorm. "If the rain stops," Jules reminded me as we shouldered our packs, "we don't hesitate. We don't discuss it, we just run." Agreed. I don't want to wind up in a tree. I had prepared like a field study. I had my camera in a waterproof case, my notebook in a Ziploc, and notes on everything I'd found. I would be doing this systematically, approach the situation like a scientist. After all, we didn't know what we were up against, whether it was even real, or if we had created our own rainstorm boogeyman. Jules, however, carried bear spray and a knife. She didn't pretend that either would help. About 3 miles in, I found a bobcat. It was impaled on a branch about 18 feet up. This body was fresh, maybe days. A mile further, a mummified dog draped over a branch. The hide had dried tight over bones. The density was increasing. Were we approaching the thing's territory? Lo and behold, we found something like a nest around 10 a.m. It was off-trail about 100 yards into old growth, in a depression surrounded by the largest Sitka spruce I'd ever seen. The canopy here was so thick, the rain barely penetrated, just occasional heavy drops making it through, hitting the ground with audible impacts. I knew something was wrong before I could identify what, because there was absolute silence here, as if all other wildlife knew better than to roost here. And then I made a realization. I could hear the rain. I could hear it drumming on the canopy above us, and hear the water dripping down through the branches, right? But because the canopy was so thick, I wasn't getting wet. That's what the rule meant. It means we're too close. We had found it. That rule had sounded the most unrealistic. How could it rain and you not get wet? But now it made perfect sense. I looked at the ground. It was matted and compressed here, a thick pad that crunched underfoot. When I knelt down and felt it, I found fur, bone fragments, decomposed matter, pressed into this dense carpet-like thing. This must have been years of accumulation. And God, did it stink. I stood and looked up then. The remains weren't just on the ground. They were still in the trees, all in various states of decomposition. Pieces and bits, skeletons, full carcasses. They were above us, like a messed up timeline. Near the base of one spruce, half buried in the matted floor, was a hiking boot. It was old, and the leather was cracked, but the laces were still tied. The boot had come off a foot that was still wearing it. Joel's voice called to me. "Hey, I think we'd better go." "Hold on, I need to take pictures. Write this down." Suddenly, she said, "Don't move." I froze. She then whisper shouted, "Above you, on the trunk." Slowly, I tilted my head back, and at first I didn't see it. The bark of a Sitka spruce is gray-brown and deeply furrowed. The moss is dark green, fading to brown. I scanned the trunk, looking for whatever had alarmed Jules, and I saw nothing but bark and moss, until the trunk moved. 20 feet up, maybe 25. The movement was so slight, I almost missed it. A shifting in the texture of the trunk, like the bark itself was rearranging. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the shape. There was a figure pressed flat against the trunk, head down. It was long and narrow, with limbs that were not perfectly symmetrical. Its color was gray-brown, almost exactly like the color of wet driftwood. The surface wasn't quite skin or bark, but something in between. And whatever it was descending, slowly. One limb extended, found purchase on the bark, and gripped it with a sound like wet leather on wood, and the body would flow downward, very slowly. Then another limb. Before long, I could see its hands. They were wrapped around the trunk, the fingers of them digging into the bark hard enough to leave marks, fresh marks, just like Kel had described them above our tent. I held my breath, and I stopped moving. The thing descended another 2 feet, and stopped. Its head turned. The movement reminded me of a surveillance camera panning from side to side. It was facing down, looking directly at me. That creature clung motionless to the trunk, and its eyes on me felt like pressure against my skin. It began to move again, this time upwards. It ascended the same way it descended, one awkwardly long limb at a time, yet moving so steadily and precise. I heard branches shift and the creaking of wood, and then the sounds moved away until there was nothing left but rain. I didn't move for another minute. It was then that I felt Jules grab my arm, nearly making me scream, and she shouted, "Run!" Racing back to the trailhead was the most panicked I'd ever felt in my life. The entire way back, I couldn't stop thinking about why it didn't kill me. But if I had to guess, I simply caught it between meals. If you're still listening, I want you to know that I still don't know what it is. I'm a naturalist. I know what I saw. I know what it does. And now I know those rules exist for a reason. They're not just superstition. They're survival instructions, passed down by people who learned them the hard way. And I will tell them to you again. 1. If the rain stops unexpectedly, return to your vehicle right away. The rain stopping means it's awake. The rain stopping means it's hunting. 2. If you hear rain but cannot feel it, retrace your steps. You are too close to where it lives. 3. If you find animal remains above head height, do not run. Walk back the way you came without stopping. 4. Do not camp in the hoe during active rainfall. And 5. A new rule that I've added. If you visit the hoe during rain, and you feel in the weeks after a pull towards sharp things, thorns, needles, points, or you have dreams of rain going up to the sky, tell someone. Tell them before you can't remember why it matters. That was definitely one of the more interesting stories I've read in a while. Lots of research in this one. Not sure how true the story is, but this is one new monster I won't soon forget the next time I'm taking a stroll through the woods, especially if it starts to rain. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can follow me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can send me your scary stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org. Follow and leave a review of Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. You can also listen to Unexplained Encounters and more scary story narrations from me on YouTube on the Darkness Prevails channel. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.